Chapter 1853. A Sea of Fire. Vines. It knelt on the ground, tears streaming down its face. The master of the laws couldn't bear to see it plead with its eyes. Grandpa Lin, I really know I was wrong. I shouldn't have degenerated into doing things that hurt your heart. I know you have high hopes for me, but everything I did was to find out the answer. If you really know why you can't tell me, is it really that hard to get the answer out? Its pleading words echoed through the air. For a moment the old man froze. If he wanted to, not only would it die in this sealed space, but he would also be captured. As for what would happen to him in the future, it would be up to the old man or the God Emperor to decide. He didn't do that. All he did was bind it to the sealed space. The sea of fire continued to burn, but it wasn't as turbulent as before. The vines stopped growing too. It was a place shrouded in clouds and smoke. A lone island floated in the middle of a boundless sea. From time to time, waves would surge and crash against the shore. The entire island was covered in trees, and vines climbed up the branches. The sea breeze didn't smell fishy at all. It was refreshing. Along the shoreline, where the island's greenery met, was a simple fish house. An old man wearing a conical bamboo hat sat in the fishing area of the house. He held a fishing rod which had neither a line nor a hook. It hung over the sand. Old Master Lin. A thunderous sound rang out in the hazy sky. Soon after, a burly man with an axe on his shoulder emerged from the clouds in the sky. His dark chest was bare, and the golden rocks on the shore glowed, illuminating his chest. What brings you here to this old man? Shouldn't you be busy establishing the god race that the Lord entrusted to you? Hey, you old geezer! Can't I just look at you? The burly man shouted at the top of his lungs, then glanced at the fishing rod in the old man's hand. You're trying to cultivate your emotions? Are you fishing? Then you should go out and fish. What are you doing here? So what if there are no fish in the sea? The old man slowly retracted his fishing rod and stood by the railing of the fish house. Facing the sea breeze and watching the waves churn, the strong man also looked at the sea. Looks like the rules here have been set up perfectly. I guess so. But even now, this old man still can't understand the Lord's intentions. Why did he say those words to us before he died, and then leave after spending countless years to open up a new world? Shh. Old man, you're really bold. How can you understand the Master's thoughts? The burly man said. If I don't understand, then I have to say it out loud. Besides, his lordship isn't here, and we don't even know if he's still alive. The brawny man's eyes were as wide as copper bells. He frowned deeply and signaled the old man to stop talking nonsense. Even so, there was sorrow in his eyes. Billions of years had passed, but the Lord had left and never returned. Maybe it was true. Master also said before he left that this journey will be dangerous, and he doesn't know if he will live or die. I'm sure you know why he kept us here. It's not easy to give birth to someone who can help the Master. With the Lord's realm, he can open up a world with a wave of his hand. What's more, everything here was created by the Lord. Can anyone jump out of this shackle? No matter how much they grow, they will still need to be suppressed by the Lord. In this case, it's better for the Lord to bring us back. Even if we die, we will die a happy death. The old man's words were full of confusion about the Lord. You can't say that. Suddenly, a smile flashed in the strong man's eyes. This smile made the old man frown. Hey, let me tell you, the Lord left a seed of hope here. What do you mean? Just now, when I opened up the God race that the Lord specially told me to, I saw the Son of the Lord and the Mistress. What did you say? Hearing this, the old man's eyes instantly widened. The old man's body couldn't help but tremble. The surrounding rules of heaven and earth became even more chaotic, and the sea around the fish house was turbulent. Isn't that child already? The Lord's means are not something you and I can imagine. When I opened up the God race space just now, I sensed it with my divine sense. That little guy is awake now, but the Lord has erased all his memories. He can't remember anything that happened before. His memories have been erased. The old man nodded lightly. The agitated emotions in his heart just now gradually calmed down. If his memories were erased, it seemed that the Lord didn't want him to remember his previous experiences. Thinking about it, even an old man like him didn't want to think about that kind of experience, let alone a child who was only a few years old. Since the Lord and the mistress's son was here, the old man seemed to have found a reason to stay here. Maybe in the future, that child. I think the Lord should think so too. He wants to give the Son of God a new life, so that he can grow up without natural enemies. When he grows up enough to share the Lord's worries, you and I will tell him everything. That will also be the time for our Milky Way to return to our old land. The strong man's heart was full of joy. At first, his thoughts were actually different from the old man's. He also didn't understand why the Lord wanted to condense a small version of Milky Way with nearly 30% of his power. He also didn't think that the newcomers here could really grow up to share the Lord's worries. It wasn't until he saw the Lord's Son that he finally understood the Lord's good intentions. The Lord wanted to give the Son of God enough time to grow up through a blueprint that was almost the same as Milky Way's. For Milky Way, the Son of God might be their only hope. That's great. The old man clenched his fist and nodded vigorously. All the slander he had just slandered the Lord was his loyalty. He thought that the Lord leaving him here was actually abandoning him. At worst, he would die. He was never afraid to sacrifice for his race. Now it seemed, maybe it was because he didn't understand his Lord. Where is that child now? The old man's eyes showed urgency. I haven't connected the God race to him yet. You don't need to rush to see that child. Since the Lord has erased his memory, you should be able to understand what he means. From now on, the two of us can treat him as the Son of God, but only in private. You're right. The old man calmed down a little. You came here to tell me this? Why? Isn't this worth mentioning? The strong man laughed and said, This is only one of the reasons. The second reason is to tell you that you should set up the rules of the God race as soon as possible. The seed that the Lord left behind is also about to bloom and bear fruit. In a while, I will go and connect the Son of God to the God race. Okay, no problem. Thinking of the Son of God, the old man was full of enthusiasm. The strong man also carried his axe and turned to leave with a laugh. After taking a few steps, he stopped again. Then what do you think we should call this child in the future? Chapter 1854. Time flew by. The former isolated island houses were built around Goldstone Beach. The sea here was still clear, but there was a faint fishy smell in the sea breeze. Waves lapped against the beach, and seaweed would always be pushed over by the waves. A dozen or so barefooted children were playing around the shore, picking up the shells on the shore and competing with each other to see who could pick up the bigger and prettier shell. A dilapidated fish house stood at the junction between the green land and Goldstone Beach. Compared to the other houses on the island, this fish house looked like it had been baptized by time. An old man sat on the rotten wooden planks, looking at the children running against the waves with a gratified smile. Before Goldstone Beach, young men and women would walk past the fish house from time to time. When they saw the old man, they would quietly stop and bow to him before leaving. It was this peaceful scene that a pitch-black shadow suddenly appeared in the void above the island. One had to know that flying was prohibited on this island. Many islanders enjoying life on the coast frowned as they looked at the void. During this time, a well-equipped team had already arrived at the shadow. Move aside, I want to see your king. It was a piercingly cold voice that spread in all directions from the void. When the team leader who was heading towards the shadows saw the newcomer clearly, he frowned deeply, but he refused to budge an inch. God Monarch Joy, outsiders are not allowed to enter the land of the law. Please don't be rash, lest you attract unnecessary trouble. This seat wants you to move aside. Don't you understand? Rumble, The clear sky above the island was suddenly covered by a layer of dark clouds. Terrifying thunder rumbled in the void. More and more residents of the island flew toward the dark shadow. The women on the island also protected the children on the coast in their arms. God monarch joy, don't you dare act presumptuously in the land of the law. Many angry shouts came one after another, but the person in the shadow still didn't step out. You think you're qualified to stop this seat? Scram! With a loud bang, the many islanders in front of the shadow were knocked back 100 meters and coughed up blood. Seeing that the newcomer really dared to make a move in the land of law, countless islanders frowned deeply. Light flashed in their hands, and the great Tao was mobilized, causing the laws here to become extremely chaotic. You didn't let me in, but I still insisted on coming in. Not long after, a foot stepped out from the shadows, and the surrounding residents were about to attack the moment he stepped in. All of you, stand down. The vigorous voice resounded in all directions. Everyone turned around and saw a white-haired old man with a ruddy complexion appear behind them. This old man was none other than the one who had been sitting in front of the fish house. Your Majesty! The residents bowed to the old man. At the same time, the person in the shadow had completely entered the void of the island. He wore a black robe and had sword-like eyebrows and bright eyes. There was even a sharp aura between his brows. All of you, stand down. But this is the land of laws. No outsider is allowed to enter. Godly monarch Pleasure doesn't follow the rules. It's against the rules for him to come here, someone shouted angrily. I set the rules. Let him in. With that, the old man turned around and returned to the dilapidated fish house. The young man who had entered the land of the law had been watching the show with his arms crossed. It was only when the old man agreed to let him in and the other residents were indignant that he curled his lips at them with a mocking smile. Out of the way. The residents were angry, but they didn't dare stop him. The young man walked through them with his head held high, chest puffed out, and couldn't help but snort. Stop me? What a joke! Everyone was furious. Quite a few people clenched their fists and tried to step forward, but the people next to them stopped them. This was the land of laws, and the island's residents were the masters of the laws of many planes. They commanded the laws of all worlds, but the one who truly ruled them was the old man. If the Lord of the Laws let godly monarch Pleasure in, then he could enter. The masters of the laws didn't dare say anything. Godly monarch Pleasure, sit. The old man in front of the fish house pointed at Goldstone Beach. Although the young man was unruly, when he faced the old man, his eyes shone with rare respect. Grandpa Lin. After bending down slightly, the young man sat on the golden rock beach obediently. Everyone was shocked. Did godly monarch Pleasure and the Lord know each other? Judging from their expressions, they seemed to be on good terms. Grandpa Lin, you're still living in this fish house? Seriously, don't these clansmen know how to build a new house for you? Even if they don't build one, they should at least fix it up. I was the one who told them not to do it. Fine. Right, here's a gift I brought for you. As he spoke, the young man took out a set of fishing gear. When I passed by the dwarves, I asked the dwarf king to forge this out of extraterrestrial dark steel. Grandpa Lin, you love fishing. I'm sure you'll like it. Thank you. I didn't expect this place to become like this after millions of years. That's right. When you came here back then, I was the only one here. Back then, you were quite naughty and mischievous. How could you be as considerate as you are now, knowing to give me a gift? The old man chuckled and accepted the fishing gear. After glancing at it for a moment, he carefully placed it on the rotten wood of the fish house. The other islanders were stunned. The old man never allowed anything to be placed on the wood. Masters of the laws who went out on a trip would often bring him gifts, which he usually placed on the beach beneath the fish house. For godly monarch Pleasure to give him a fishing rod next to the rotten wood, it was obvious that he really liked it. However, when the young man saw this, he frowned slightly. At the same time, the old man looked at the handsome young man, a trace of emotion in his eyes. "It's been millions of years, but you've grown quite a bit. Why do you have the time to come visit me? Shouldn't you be preaching the Tao in the outside world?" When he heard this, the young man hurriedly retracted his gaze. "Preaching the Tao requires rest, right? I just happened to be traveling far away, and came across many interesting things I wanted to share with you. I also have some questions I'd like you to answer. I knew you wouldn't visit me for no reason. However, since you could think of something interesting to share with this old man and ask this old man to solve your doubts, it means that you have this old man in your heart. Alright, let's talk about the interesting things later. Tell me about your questions, and I'll see if I can solve them for you." Godly monarch Pleasure scratched his head in embarrassment. When the old man saw this, he couldn't help but smile. Before long, godly monarch Pleasure's gaze faded, and she said with a serious expression, "Don't worry." Chapter 1855. The young man's eyes were brimming with anticipation. He quietly waited for the old man's reply. After a long while, the old man looked at him and asked softly, "Why do you suddenly want to know all this?" The young man didn't understand. He'd already explained his reasons clearly. Why did the old man ask again? However, he still repeated his reasons. Only then did the old man nod in understanding. "I see. Yes, I've been curious about this ever since I found out about it. Since all things have a mother, I should have one too. However, I've never seen one in the last 10 million years. I've asked the God King before, and he's quite secretive about it. However, I'm sure he knows. If he knows, why didn't he tell you? Have you thought about it?" "I don't know. I won't ask either. But I'm sure since the God King knows, you should know as well. You've doted on me since I was young. I'm sure you'll—" "Apologies, I don't know. Men, escort God King Delight out." With that, the old man turned around and prepared to return to the wooden hut. Anxiety flashed across God King Delight's face when he saw this. "Impossible. You must know. Why didn't you tell me? Why?" "Escort God King Delight out," the old man shouted coldly. The surrounding masters of the laws immediately surrounded him, trying to drag him away. Delight struggled with all his might, gazing longingly at the old man. However, the old man didn't even look back as he returned to the fish hut and slammed the door shut. To Delight, the old man wasn't just closing a door, but also his last hope. "God King Delight, His Majesty told us, let go. I can leave on my own." Delight flung off the masters of the laws, his eyes filled with resentment as he glared at the dilapidated fish hut. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly turned around and walked up to the fishing gear. "You're not worthy of using the fishing gear I gave you." With a thud, the fishing gear was smashed into pieces. The rotten wood that was placed together with the fishing gear was also crushed into powder by them. "How dare you!" Although the masters of the laws didn't know what the rotten wood was, they knew it was the old man's favorite. God King Euphoria had crushed it with a single stomp. The masters of the laws were all furious. "What? It's just a broken piece of wood. So what if I crush it? If you like it, I'll send someone to send you a 10-million-year-old ice wood as compensation." "How can a mere ice wood compare to it?" the masters of the laws shouted angrily. God King Joy glanced at the many masters of the laws surrounding him. "So you want to fight me? Who's afraid of you?" Quite a few masters of the laws rolled up their sleeves, eager to compete with God King Joy. Just then, "Stop! Send God King Pleasure away!" The old man's angry roar echoed out from within the fish house. His roar caused the surrounding masters of the laws to calm down and suppress the fury in their hearts. Everyone stared at God King Pleasure. Facing everyone's gaze, he only snorted lightly. He didn't even look back as he left the land of law. It had been billions of years since he left, and he had never set foot in the land of laws again. When he heard the words, "Grandpa Lin," which he hadn't heard for billions of years, the old man's mind was filled with countless thoughts. He looked at the bitter-faced God King, who knelt on the ground, and sensed the unwillingness in his voice. His eyes welled up. God King really did want an answer, and the old man did know the answer. But what could he say? God King Pleasure was a descendant left behind by his master, his only remaining descendant. In his current state, he wasn't strong enough to face off against his master's enemies. Telling him would just be harming him. He knew, but he couldn't say it. However, he never would have guessed that God King Pleasure would grow to such a state. Grandpa Lin! He cried out from within the sea of flames, kneeling on the ground and kowtowing repeatedly. He really knows his wrongs. He'll never harm the common people again. Since neither you nor the God King are willing to answer that question, then he won't ask. I only ask that you let him go. He really knows his wrongs. That's too fake. At some point, Shwe Bebe had already woken up from her dream. Hearing God King Pleasure's tearful and apologetic confession, she curled her lip. Only an idiot would believe such an apology. Bebe, you're awake. Both Hong Hong and Momo revealed looks of joy. Bebe grinned and pointed at God King Pleasure. Who is this guy confessing to? That old grandpa? Wah, please don't let that old grandpa believe his nonsense. That male duck's heart is really ruthless. I'm such a cute and beautiful girl, yet he was so ruthless to scare me. Just tell me, is he even human? Actually, Bebe's words had no logic at all. He simply hated God King Pleasure, and of course, he also praised himself. However, there was one thing he was right about. God King Pleasure's confession was very fake. At least in the eyes of outsiders, this kind of confession was completely an expedient measure. There was no sincerity in it. If they had encountered this kind of confession, they definitely wouldn't have given him any chance. Yet, the old man's heart softened. Why don't I give him another chance? Looking at her crying, the old man's heart softened uncontrollably, and he whispered in his heart. No matter what, God King Pleasure was his master's son. For the sake of his master, he'd let him off this time. Give him a chance and see what he'd become in the future. At this thought, the burning flames and the green vines vanished into thin air. The old man unsealed the space around God King Pleasure. At the same time, he slowly walked toward God King Pleasure, until he was right in front of him. Grandpa Lin! God King Pleasure's eyes shone with a final plea in the face of death. The old man couldn't bear it any longer. He bent down and said, I'll... Heh. As he bent down, God King Pleasure's lips curved into a sinister smile. Old man, anyone who tries to stop me from becoming the God King must die. A black dagger had appeared in God King Pleasure's hand at some point. It was the same dagger Kuei Lin had used to shatter his godhead. The dagger flashed with a dark light, leaving a black halo in its wake as it stabbed viciously at the old man's chest. Elder Lin! Gu Zichen stomped through the air. When the three Shwe sisters saw this, they couldn't help but cover their mouths. God King Pleasure's face contorted into a sinister grin. Die! Bang! Unbeknownst to them, at this moment, a ray of blue light that was like a comet cut through the sky. Just as their dagger was about to fall. Just as God King Pleasure's dagger was about to land, he felt a vicious kick to the chest. Golden blood spurted from his mouth and splattered across the sky. Chapter 1856. A blue pillar of light appeared in front of Elder Lin, piercing through the sky. This kind of pure blue could only make people think of the starlight of the stars in the sky. At the same time, everyone sensed that, as soon as the starlight appeared, the elements of outer space didn't dare compete with it. They either wandered around, not daring to approach, or bowed to it. Only could possess such a domineering will of the stars, Yi Zichen. Shwe Momo was the first to call out his name. As someone with the Emperor Star's light, she could sense it clearly. This was the light of the Emperor Star. The Third Era's Emperor Star had chosen 2 emperors, and there were 2 lords of the Emperor Star. However, it seemed that only Yi Zichen liked to show up at this critical moment. The starlight slowly dissipated. A figure gradually emerged from the starlight. He was tall, thin, and wore a black robe. He had a head of long, jet-black hair, eyes as black as jewels, eyebrows as sharp as swords, a face as sharp as a knife, and thin lips. His pitch-black eyes were like the eyes of a tiger. When he stared at him, he exuded authority without being angry. Yi Zichen. The newcomer was none other than the Lord of the Emperor's Star, Yi Zichen. Wow, this guy's so handsome. Bei couldn't help but open her mouth. She'd interacted with Yi Zichen quite a bit, but in her eyes Yi Zichen seemed even more Chunibyu. Shui Honghong and Shui Momo were also watching intently. Their beautiful eyes shone brightly. Not good. Their hearts were pounding. They never would have guessed that after so long Yi Zichen had become so handsome. Oh my God, I finally made it in time. Is my head a little swollen after using starlight for the first time? He'd broken through in 3 seconds. Yi Zichen, who'd clearly looked handsome, hadn't lasted more than 3 seconds before he'd returned to his original state. He rubbed his face, making all sorts of strange expressions. He really was uncomfortable. When she saw this, Bei nodded in satisfaction. This was the Yi Zichen she knew. Shui Honghong and Shui Momo couldn't help but smile wryly at each other. However, as soon as their eyes met, Shui Momo abruptly looked away, her face bright red. She recalled what Honghong had said to her earlier. "Hey, old man Lin, long time no see. You're still as vigorous as ever." Yi Zichen rubbed his head for a while, then turned around and smiled towards the elder. However, his smile seemed like he was gritting his teeth. How could they not grit their teeth in anger? This old man, when he was still in the modern realm, this old man was an old guy who couldn't even get out of bed, and all the blood vessels in his body were blocked. When Yi Zichen first entered the immortal circle, he actually believed his bullshit. He was beaten by someone. He did his best to unblock the old man's blood vessels, allowing him to live a happy, normal life again. Hey! That old geezer had transformed into the freaking master of the laws of the modern world. After that, he was thrown into the immortal, demon, and devil realms. From then on, he could no longer return to his home. It couldn't be said that the wind and rain that followed were all caused by this old man, but it also had an unclear relationship with him. Now, he's here again. Looking at his old but vigorous appearance, during the invasion of the devil race, he could probably beat the crap out of those devil race wretches with just a breath. Transcended. Not bad. On the other hand, old Master Lin's face did not turn red nor did his heart skip a beat. Perhaps it was because he was really old that his skin was thick enough. One could not see the slightest bit of embarrassment on his face. He completely ignored Yi Zichen's gnashing of teeth and cupped his hands. "Thank you for saving me once again." Again. Look at what he just said. He still remembered what happened in the modern realm. If he'd forgotten, he wouldn't have used the word again. "You're welcome. Who told me to be so kind? Don't you think so?" He chuckled. Before long, the sound of whistling wind could be heard from the outer realm. The newcomers were none other than Su Mei and the others. Because Yi Zichen had been worried about the situation, he'd used starlight as a guide to get here. He just so happened to see her trying to attack old Master Lin, so he decided to enter the fray this way. "Yi Zichen." Bibi flew over, yelling Yi Zichen's name. When Yi Zichen heard this, he looked over and saw Bibi running towards him, waving his little fists. However, he rubbed his eyes. Was he seeing things? If he wasn't mistaken, the ones by Bibi's side were Shui Honghong and Shui Mo. Shui Mo had woken up. Yi Zichen. By now, Bibi had already flown to Yi Zichen's side. She waved her little fists and pouted. "You're too late. Big sister Bibi was already, slap." She slapped Bibi on the head and pushed him away mercilessly. Yi Zichen's eyes widened, and he stared fixedly at the two behind him. Honghong. Shui Honghong looked just like she'd first met Yi Zichen. She wore a long, flowing, fiery red dress. She smiled and nodded, then took half a step to the side, allowing Shuemo to pass. "Shuemo, you're awake." Shuemo's face was as red as a mosquito's. Bibi, who'd been pushed to the side, bared his fangs and brandished his claws, but Hong Hong grabbed him and shook her head. Everyone looked at Yi Zichen and Shuemo. Then, they saw Yi Zichen pull her into his arms. "That's wonderful! It's wonderful that you're awake, wonderful that you're awake." Shuemo could sense Yi Zichen's emotions, but inexplicably, she recalled what Hong Hong had said to her. As soon as Yi Zichen hugged her, she pushed him away, blushed, and stammered, "You, be careful. There's a lot of people a-watching." "If they're watching, then they're watching. What's the big deal? It's just a hug, right? When you were injured before, I fed you medicine, but I didn't see you like this. Who needs you to feed me medicine? Did you forget? Back when we were still at the academy, we had to save." "Shut up, idiot." Shuemo punched Yi Zichen in the chest, then glared at him to stop talking. Then she ran to Hong Hong's side, her face as red as a ripe cherry. "What's going on?" Yi Zichen scratched his head in confusion. It was just a hug. It wasn't like he'd never hugged her before. Back at the academy, Shuemo interacted with men every day, but she'd never seen them take off their clothes like this. He glanced at Shuemo, but all he saw was Hong Hong nodding at him. Shuemo didn't even look at him. Women were just so hard to understand. Yi Zichen scratched his head in confusion, then averted his gaze and waved at Gu Zichen. "You're here too. You're here." Gu Zichen smiled. "You transcended. Congratulations." Same to you, same to you." "I transcended, but doesn't that mean you transcended as well?" "You transcended, but everything was ruined. In truth, my transcendence isn't much. There's nothing to be happy about." With that, Yi Zichen looked off into the distance. Chapter 1857. It was truly over. When it felt the impact on its chest, through the blue light, it could vaguely see the face of the person who came. There was also the familiar power of the stars. It knew that the newcomer was Yi Zichen. He came. His anger at Yi Zichen for toying with him wasn't something that could be erased in a few short hours. He'd buried this hatred deep in his heart, waiting for the moment he saw Yi Zichen again. Then, he'd extract his soul and take it with him. That way, he'd get a taste of the punishment for making fun of him. Until now, it was still the same. However, he might not be able to do it. Yi Zichen wasn't Elder Lin. He used Elder Lin's tolerance and love for him to find a chance for him to turn the tables. If he could get rid of Elder Lin, it would be a miracle. He took advantage of the chaos to return to the God realm to recover his divine power. The Master of the Laws would probably need some time to investigate Elder Lin's death. As long as the God Emperor didn't go to the Land of Law, he wouldn't know about Elder Lin's death. This way, he could still stay in the God race and be his God King, secretly looking for an opportunity to usurp the throne. It could be said that this was the most thorough and reasonable plan that they could come up with at the moment. Man proposes, but God disposes. Thanks to Elder Lin's forgiveness, their plan was almost 60% complete. He had completely let his guard down, and the only thing missing was the dagger that could pierce through his chest. Yi Zichen had arrived. Just like the arrival of a savior, the timing was just right. The tremendous impact that had been transmitted to his chest by that kick had worsened his condition, which had already been ravaged by the star power of the star arrow. He still wanted to return to Yi Zichen and make him regret his actions. He couldn't do it. Or it could be said that the spirit was willing, but the strength was insufficient. The blood in his body had almost dried up, and his vision was starting to blur. His divine power had been exhausted, so he couldn't summon any power at all. It was very difficult for him to even stand straight in the outer space. Return to Yi Zichen and the others and clamor about stealing his soul to vent their anger? Yi Zichen didn't even need to do anything. Anyone left behind could easily take care of him, even Shuebebe. So much so that they stopped moving. He was still angry. That was inevitable. The resentment towards those people was not something that could be put down on the verge of death. They were the ones who thwarted his grand ambitions and prevented him from becoming a divine emperor. In the end, he would never know the answer. What a pity! Sitting in the void, it could not help but smile bitterly. Any creature would recall the past before they died. Because at this moment, no matter how much wealth you have or how high your status is, the only thing that could accompany him was his memories. Memories were the most precious. For some reason, he should have a lot of memories, but at this time, he could only think of the first 10 million years. At that time, he was really heroic. With gratitude in his heart, he traveled to many planes to pass on the path of joy to them. It was very hard, but it was very fulfilling. He still remembered that at that time, he was always smiling. Now that he thought about it, Happy had never abandoned him. It was just that at a certain point in time, he abandoned Happy. His so-called emptiness and loneliness were all given to himself by himself. After that, he became sick and enjoyed the satisfaction brought to him by destruction. He enjoyed the despair in the eyes of the other planes when their planes were about to be destroyed. He felt their hatred towards him. He was very satisfied. So satisfied that even his smile was sinister. But after that, he was not happy at all. For tens of millions of years, he repeated the same things over and over again. Destruction, destruction, destruction. Compared to the God King of Destruction, his title of God King of Joy was more suitable for destruction. Until now, his path to destruction had ended. Now, he was about to welcome the destruction that others had given him. Why isn't there any movement from the male duck? Did it run away because it saw that there were so many of us? Bebe mumbled to himself as he looked around but couldn't see the duck's shadow. Male duck. Elder Lin furrowed his brows. Yeah, the one that looks special. Before Bibi could finish, Yi Zichen covered her mouth. In that instant, Yi Zichen sensed Elder Lin's displeasure at Bibi's insults. Yi Zichen hurriedly covered Bibi's mouth to prevent her from continuing. In his heart, he was confused about the relationship between Bibi and Elder Lin. Nonsense. After scolding Bibi, Yi Zichen continued, God King of Joy didn't run. Even if he wanted to, with so many people locked onto him, there's no way he could escape. Besides, he doesn't have the strength to run. At this moment, the people standing here could sense it from tens of thousands of meters away with their divine telekinesis. He didn't run away and just sat in the air. One could still feel his anger, which he had nowhere to vent, and his aura, which was constantly withering. He gave up. Gu Zichen muttered. The others nodded. AI. Inexplicably, Elder Lin sighed as he took a few steps forward. Let me bring him back to repent for his sins. Repent? He wasn't going to kill Bibi, but rather take him away to repent? After all, just moments ago, Bibi had pointed a knife at him. Trying to assassinate a king of the laws was an act of treason to the land of the laws. But Elder Lin's final answer was just to repent. Elder Lin's relationship with Bibi isn't ordinary, Gu Zichen transmitted into Yi Zichen's consciousness. I know. Yi Zichen nodded. He'd sensed it from Elder Lin's expression when Bibi had spoken ill of Bibi. He'd shared this information with Yi Zichen so he'd know what was going on. Since Yi Zichen had already sensed it, Gu Zichen didn't say anything else. He smiled at Elder Lin and said, Be careful, Elder Lin. If he can kill you once, he'll do it a second time. He won't, I believe he'll repent. Elder Lin chuckled, then glanced at the crowd. His gaze lingered on Yi Zichen for a moment. Little friend Yi, thank you for your help just now. I'll take Divine King Pleasure back to the land of the laws and put her under my control. You can all return to the new era. It's the era of the era. The situation is dire. You need to go back and take charge, right? This junior will take his leave first. Yi Zichen didn't say anything else. He cupped his hands and left with his subordinate. The relationship between Bibi and Elder Lin was a secret, and Yi Zichen had no intention of prying into their relationship. The others followed behind Yi Zichen, but they didn't get very far. Chapter 1858. As Yi Zichen stopped, the others stopped as well. All of them looked in the direction of her mother with a look of pity in their eyes. What's wrong? Bibi didn't quite understand what was going on. Shouldn't they be going home? Why had they all stopped and looked into the distance with pity in their eyes? Shui Momo, who was holding Bei Bei's hand, patted her little head. At the same time, the venerable of numinous treasure sighed. What a pity! Pity? Bibi was the only one who didn't understand the situation. He blinked in confusion, while the elder following Su Meier snorted. He didn't show much mercy. He only has himself to blame. There's no need to sympathize with him. Big Sister Hong Hong, Big Sister Momo, what on earth are you talking about? Bibi swung her sister's arms, her voice brimming with curiosity and desire for knowledge. That guy gave up on living. He's preparing to detonate his godhead, said Hong Hong. That guy? A male duck? Hong Hong and Momo nodded. They'd witnessed Stark's desperate self-detonation when he'd been forced into desperate straits. The energy fluctuations from his godhead's imminent detonation were exactly the same as the ones in the outside. After thinking it over, they could only think of the God King of Pleasure. Is that so? Then Bibi bit her lip, but she couldn't help but think back to the nightmare she'd suffered. When she thought of that scene, her hands grew cold, but the kindness in her heart still made her frown. He's so pitiful. He'd used self-detonation to end his life. No matter how you thought about it, you could sense his despair. If he hadn't lost all desire for life and no hope for the future, who would choose such a method to end his life? He'd really given up. He'd sat in the sky for a long time, then made this decision. Running was impossible. Countless auras had sealed off his path of retreat. He was sure that the instant he moved, those who'd locked onto him would catch up to him. Even if they didn't chase after him, his remaining divine power wouldn't be enough to support him back to the outside. The spiritual will that he released outside also helped him see Elder Lin, who was rushing towards him. He still believed that even if he tried to kill Elder Lin, as long as he apologized to Elder Lin would still give him a chance. He did not know why he had such confidence, it was just an inexplicable belief. Thinking back to the tolerance that Elder Lin and the Divine Emperor had shown him in the past, he still couldn't understand why they were so tolerant of him. However, everything was no longer important, whether it was their tolerance or the answer in their hearts. He couldn't even get a result. He did not want to obtain any hope of survival from Elder Lin. He had been utterly defeated in this battle, so he was willing to accept his defeat. Rather than struggling to survive, it would be better to be proud of itself. This way, it could still leave a trace of dignity for itself. Suddenly, he stretched out his right hand. A dazzling golden light turned into a stream of light and fell into his hand. It was a perfect diamond-shaped godhead that looked like a gem. It was also the godhead that he had condensed for the second time. This godhead was different from other godheads. It seemed to have its own consciousness. When it landed in his hand, the godhead was still struggling violently. It was as if it could sense its future, and it did not want to accept this kind of future. Little fellow, you are the godhead that I condensed. You are really selfish to leave for your master. The godhead struggled with all its might to break free from his grasp, but his hand held onto it tightly. Even though the sharpness of the godhead had pierced through his palm and exposed his palm bones, he still held onto it tightly and refused to let it leave. I am the one who gave you life. Now I am going to take it back. The godhead in his hand glowed brightly. That was the power of the godhead that it had activated to escape from his grasp. The godhead laughed wantonly and allowed the godhead to struggle in his hand. He looked at Elder Lin, who was rushing towards him with an anxious look in his eyes. Holy Son, don't do anything stupid. Elder Lin had completely panicked when he sensed that his godhead was about to self-destruct. Almost immediately, he wanted to tamper with the laws of heaven and earth so that he could stop his self-destruction. However, he discovered that he was actually unable to change the laws there. The only thing he could think of was that his Godhead had fixed the laws there. In the past, Elder Lin would definitely have sighed in his heart, as expected of the Holy Son left behind by the Lord. Even if there was no one to teach him, he could still establish a connection with the world that the Lord had left behind. As expected of the Holy Son, the blood of the Lord really flowed in his body. Now, Holy Son, Elder Lin tried his best to get closer to his Godhead. Just as he was about to self-destruct, he heard Elder Lin's shout. Holy Son? Was he talking about him? Could it be that this was the identity that Elder Lin and the Divine Emperor had been hiding from him all this time? He was right. They really knew about his identity. He just didn't know what this Holy Son represented. He really wanted to know who his parents were. A gloomy smile flashed across his eyes. In the end, he no longer had any attachment to this world. If he delayed any longer, Elder Lin might reach the self-destruction range of the Godhead. He didn't want Elder Lin to be buried in this explosion. This was also the last thing he could do for this old man who had always doted on him. It was also the last thing he could do for this old man who had always doted on him. Bang! He forcefully crushed the Godhead in his hand. When the Godhead turned into specks of golden light and flowed into the void like sand, the remaining divine power in his body was also extremely chaotic. It was going berserk as if it wanted to burst his body. Just as it was about to die, a voice transmission appeared in its sea of consciousness. He was almost stunned as he stared blankly at the void above his head. Not long after, his body began to tremble violently, and tears of blood flowed uncontrollably from his eyes. These tears were definitely not tears of regret as he bid farewell to this world. There seemed to be a trace of happiness in these tears. That was because he, who hadn't really smiled for tens of millions of years, had a blissful smile on his face. "Thank you! Thank you!" He raised his head and shouted at the void. No one knew where this behavior of his came from. However, anyone who could see his expression could feel the happiness on his face. Immediately, boom! Violent divine power stirred up strong gales that wreaked havoc in the void. Golden lights that looked like mushrooms lingered in front of everyone's eyes. They were dazzling. In an instant, the entire world seemed to fall silent. Chapter 1859. It wasn't hard to imagine how much energy a God King's self-destruction would unleash. The energy wreaked havoc, creating gales of wind. Whether it was the rocks or the bones of the wanderers, they became the sharpest weapons in the outside. The Venerable of Numinous Treasure and the other elders stood in front of them, creating an energy barrier. Judging by the ripples the rocks created when they struck the barrier, they could see how powerful the rocks were. Even if it was an imperial monarch, that imperial monarch would probably be riddled with countless holes by the shattered rocks and skeletons here. No wonder God King Joy forced the Freedom God King to the point of self-destruction. Xuehonghong couldn't help but mutter to herself. Judging from the energy released by God King Joy's self-destruction, it was at least several times stronger than Stark's. If God King Joy hadn't concentrated, given his reserves, Stark might not have had a chance to self-destruct. His godhead would have been snatched away. From the looks of it, the outside was similar to the First Era. There were differences in strength between God Kings, just like how the rulers of the First Era were divided into divine generals and titled emperors. What did you just say? Stark self-destructed? Su Meier looked at Xuehonghong. Although Xuehonghong's voice was low, the others heard her clearly. That's right, the Freedom God King self-destructed. All of a sudden, Yi Zichen and the others understood. The self-destruction they'd sensed on their way here was most likely Stark's. In truth, when they thought about it, it made sense. Even though they were so far away, they'd still felt the terrifying energy release. Presumably, only a God King could do such a thing. At the time, they hadn't thought about it that way because they didn't think the Ocean Emperor and the others could force a god king to such a state. They never would have guessed it was an internal conflict. Then where are the other great emperors? Yi Zichen said quite a few great emperors had come to the outside, and that many outsiders had come as well, said Yi Zichen. They've all gone back. As she spoke, Xue Honghong told Su Mei'er and the others about what had happened. When she mentioned how God King Joy had used the gods as a barrier to block the astral arrows, even though they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, it was still a vivid image. They couldn't help but shudder in fear. It was no wonder that the smell of blood was so strong when they arrived. At first, they thought that it was the blood qi left behind by the great emperors fighting with the gods from the outer domain. They didn't expect it to be the internal strife of the god race. A god king fighting a god king caused one of the god kings to explode. The deity king also enslaved the souls of the deities, using them to fight for an opportunity for his own life. The Outerium god race is truly a sick race. Su Mei'er couldn't help sighing. You can't say that. Actually, there are still kind-hearted people in the Outer Realm god race. However, the old man at the side said something that contradicted Su Mei'er's words. If we're talking about morbidity, it's actually only a small part of it. Most of the gods of the god race still yearned for peace, but their leaders were all different. He's someone with an obsession. In the end, obsession will turn into sickness and psychological distortion. The Venerable of Lingbao snorted. Everyone was silent. This was indeed the case. It was good for people to have obsessions. Having obsessions could spur people to work hard to fulfill their obsessions or long-cherished wishes. But over time, this kind of obsession would really become a nightmare that shrouded one's heart. No matter how healthy a person was, they would also be tormented by this kind of obsession that turned into a nightmare. In the end, they would become sick and their psychological distortion would appear. But no matter what, he had already self-destructed. It couldn't be said that all of his sins had dissipated with this self-destruction, but the many wounds he had left behind could not be made up for. He was already dead, so what else could he do? A god king of a generation, a god king that had existed since the beginning of the god race for billions of years, had finally ended up self-destructing. This inevitably felt similar to the desolation of those ancient emperors or heroes. No matter how much he hated him, he could only sigh when he saw him in such a state. Let's go. The old man beside Su Mei'er gently shook his head. In fact, he had a deep grudge against them. But now that he had self-destructed and disappeared from this world, he had no way to vent his resentment. He still wouldn't forgive him for what he'd done, but he couldn't possibly hate him as much as he did when he was alive. His energy hadn't stopped flowing, but with the barrier around them, they didn't have to worry about being swallowed up by the energy of his self-destruction. He gestured for them to leave, but Xue Mo didn't seem to care. Yi Zichen. Did any of you see Yi Zichen? Everyone was shocked. Just now, they'd been so focused on his death that no one paid any attention to Yi Zichen's whereabouts. Now that Xue Mo said that, they realized that from start to finish, all Yi Zichen had said was, "What a pity." After that, he said nothing else. Now they looked around. Yi Zichen was nowhere to be seen. He went to Elder Lin's place. Soon after, everyone looked out and saw a wisp of blue starlight moving toward the center of the explosion, facing the energy released by the Godhead's self-destruction. Everyone's hearts trembled. The Venerable of Numinous Treasure grabbed Gu Zichen by the collar. "It's my fault I didn't stop him, but this was his decision. I have no reason to stop him. Yi Zichen from a parallel plane, I really want to rip open your head and see just what you're thinking." The Venerable of Numinous Treasure tugged at his clothes. "Don't you know that's the God King's self-destruction? You're from a destroyed plane. I trust you understand the God King's power far better than we do. It's precisely because I understand that I didn't stop him." Gu Zichen slapped the Venerable of Numinous Treasure's hand away. "Don't think too badly of him. No matter what, he's a transcendent, the one with the highest cultivation among you. And you, the star left behind from the last epoch. Back in my plane, you were very self-righteous. I don't want your arrogance to ruin my only hope and that of my brothers and sisters. You said I was full of myself. Alright, stop arguing. Su Mei-er's eyes narrowed. Didn't you learn your lesson from the god race's infighting? Why are we fighting among ourselves now? The venerable of numinous treasure snorted coldly, glared viciously at Guzichin, then retreated. Chapter 1860. Su Mei-er. To Guzichin, this was a special existence. When Guzichin saw the fury in Su Mei-er's eyes, he felt inexplicably dazed. Her words just so happened to make Guzichin's chest tremble despite himself. Thinking back to his words just now, it seemed like he was really being a busybody. Because of their connection to the parallel planes, Guzichin felt deeply immersed in everything here, be it the people or the event. It was this sense of immersion that inexplicably made him feel as if he were this era's Yi Zichen. Little did he know that everything was not as he had imagined. To the people of this plane, he was just an outsider. Everyone he was familiar with, everyone who'd cared for him down to the smallest detail, belonged to Yi Zichen now. It did not belong to him. Sorry, I misspoke. Guzichin's gaze was apologetic. The longer he stayed in this plane, the more familiar it felt to him. More and more, he forgot that he was supposed to be an outsider. Just now, Su Mei-er's "this plane doesn't belong to you" had startled Guzichin awake. Thinking of his previous behavior, he couldn't help but feel apologetic. It's nothing. I believe that you are very familiar with everything here. You can't help but be immersed in it. I can understand that. Su Mei-er smiled lightly and said, but even if you are familiar with it, you must always remember that you do not belong to this plane. There are countless parallel planes that belong to you. This is definitely not it. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Mei-er turned her gaze outside the energy barrier without turning back. The destructive energy produced by its self-destruction would not dissipate in less than 3 minutes. The energy continued to wreak havoc, while Yi Zichen, who had turned into a streak of blue light, continued to rush towards Elder Lin. Saint! In the instant that it self-destructed, Elder Lin's eyes were filled with despair. The saint was dead. The only hope that his Lord had left for him, the Son of God with the blood of his Lord, had self-destructed in front of him. However, this old servant who had served his master for hundreds of millions of years could only watch him self-destruct. He felt that he had failed to live up to his Lord's expectations. A strong sense of guilt lingered in his heart, and it took a long time for him to calm down. He wanted to rush to her side, even if the raging energy left countless wounds on his body. He still did not retreat. He faced the impact of the energy and advanced forward. Just then, Elder Lin felt his arm being held tightly by someone. Elder Lin, don't go! When he turned around, he saw Yi Zichen, who was enveloped in the light of the Emperor's star. Yi Zichen looked at him worriedly. At the same time, his imperial star formed a defensive barrier in front of him, sheltering it within. Little friend Yi. Elder Lin's eyes flowed with bitterness as he shook his head towards Yi Zichen. This old man understands your good intentions. I can't let you go there again. Yi Zichen stood in front of Elder Lin and said seriously, I don't know what relationship you have with Divine King Joy, but I do know that the dead cannot come back to life. If God King Pleasure self-destructed, no one would be able to save him. If you go on now, you will only throw yourself up. There won't be any other outcome. You should know that self-destruction won't leave anything behind. You don't understand. I naturally wouldn't understand if you didn't tell me, and I probably wouldn't understand even if you did. But so long as I'm here, I absolutely won't let you go. Lin Ru is my good friend. If you die, I won't be able to explain it to her. Yi Zichen stood in front of him, refusing to budge an inch. When he mentioned Lin Ru, Elder Lin's eyes lit up. Lil Ru. You don't want Linru to be sad, do you? In that case, just live well. We, the people you sent on this ship, are all waiting for everything to end. Then, you'll let us go ashore once more. Elder Lin's eyes flashed with a warm smile. As he looked at Yi Zichen's smiling face, countless thoughts raced through his mind. To tell the truth, he knew full well that pushing Yi Zichen onto this ship was selfish on his part. As for the reason, it was because of a prophecy. The one who could share his master's worries and stand shoulder to shoulder with him would be born in the new era. After much observation, he concluded that Yi Zichen, the Lord of the Emperor's Star, was the most likely candidate. That's why he'd seized the opportunity of the demon invasion to push Yi Zichen onto this ship. In order not to ruin Yi Zichen's growth, he'd pushed everyone he could contact onto this ship. He had his own reasons, but he'd forced his way of thinking onto these people without even asking them what they wanted. They were the victims. He had to take responsibility for them. He had to continue living. No matter how the future turned out, whether he succeeded or perished, he had to stay until the end. However, the Holy Sun was dead. To him, nothing else mattered anymore. To him, the Holy Sun was the most likely candidate. Yi Zichen only had a sliver of a chance. Elder Lin, don't go. All of a sudden, a ray of golden light appeared above Yi Zichen and Elder Lin's heads. You're here? I arrived even before the Holy Sun self-destructed, said a low voice from within the golden light. In that case, why didn't I stop him? Laughed the man in the golden light. Why should I? Just because he's the Holy Sun? Elder Lin, don't forget our true reason for staying here. In truth, the Holy Sun is just a possibility. Besides, my chances of becoming the Holy Sun are practically zero. It was close to zero. He no longer had that possibility. His mentality is too twisted. Even if he succeeds and gets sent to our master, he won't be our master's helper. He might even be a hidden danger. It's not that I'm disloyal, it's that you're too foolishly loyal. The man in the golden light sighed. Suddenly, for some reason, Yi Zichen felt as if someone was looking at him from within the golden light. When he looked up, all he saw was pure gold. Lord of the Epoch Star. Yi Zichen knit his brows, then a voice rang out from within the golden light. In half a month, come find me in the God realm. There are some things you already have the right to know. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to Elder Lin and said, Elder Lin, you're heartbroken by the Holy Sun's death, and so am I. However, his death is only one less possibility. It doesn't mean that all possibilities are gone. At the very least, isn't there a new possibility in front of us? Think it over. If you can think it through, in half a month, come see me in half a month. Chapter 1861. The golden light dissipated. No one knew where it had come from, nor where it had gone. When the golden light disappeared, its destructive energy ceased as well. Elder Lin arrived at the spot where it had self-destructed almost instantly, but all he saw was an empty void. Elder Lin's wizened face was filled with sorrow. He stood in the void in a daze, staring blankly ahead with an empty gaze. As someone who could manipulate the laws of heaven and earth, he knew full well that it had truly died. Not even a wisp of its soul remained. He dispersed the starlight around him. Su Mei and the others hurried to his side as soon as the energy stopped wreaking havoc. Yi Zichen was safe and sound. This was what they wanted to see more than anything else. However, no one said a word, because they could sense the sorrow permeating the air. Holy Sun. Elder Lin stood there in a daze, muttering to himself. He couldn't agree with what the man in the golden light had just said. The Holy Sun was indeed a holy sun. He was the Lord's only heir, and his blood flowed through his veins. It could be considered as the only hope in their hearts. Elder Lin, who had lived for hundreds of millions of years, had always been full of expectations as he watched him grow. Even if he'd lost his way along the way. To Elder Lin, it wasn't impossible for him to change. That was why he was willing to give it a chance. Even before it self-destructed, he was willing to give it a chance to repent. But how had the man in the golden light done it? He clearly had the power to stop it, but he hadn't. He'd allowed the Lord's only descendant to self-destruct in front of them. Then he'd said something that Elder Lin didn't think made sense at all. This was his disloyalty. For an entire hour, Elder Lin just stood there with his back hunched. Is the Holy Son talking about him? Su Mayer couldn't contain her curiosity and asked through her divine sense. She was truly curious about the relationship between Elder Lin and him. Yi Zichen nodded. So you're saying that this being above the laws is actually working for someone else? Perhaps. In truth, Yi Zichen didn't really understand either. An hour passed, but the man in the golden light's words still echoed in his mind. Even now, he still didn't fully understand what he'd said. Elder Lin was the only one who could explain everything to him. However, in his current state, it was unlikely that he would be able to get an answer to this question. Let's return. For once, Yi Zichen didn't get to the bottom of the matter. He didn't want to burden himself any further. It seemed rather irresponsible, but he already had enough things on his mind. It took him a lot of effort to sort out the ups and downs, and he didn't want other things to add to it. But it's a mess. He would rather pretend that he didn't hear anything and that he didn't know anything. He only needed to ensure the safety of the era and prevent it from being destroyed by the attack of the Outer Realm Protoss. Then, he would safely bring the people who once belonged to the modern world back to the modern world and live an ordinary life. As for the others, if they didn't find him, he would pretend that he didn't know anything. Hearing that, the others nodded. Yi Zichen looked at Elder Lin solemnly before turning around, then nodded towards him as a form of farewell. He didn't care whether Elder Lin saw it or not before turning around to leave. Several streaks of light streaked across the sky, and only then did Elder Lin turn around. Sensing their departure, he sighed softly, and then waved his hand to seal the spot where his mother had self-destructed. This was the last place his mother could leave him. He didn't want to return to this place years later only to find it swallowed up by the Outer Realm's black hole. In the blink of an eye, nearly half a month had passed since the Outer Realm Protoss attack. It could be said that the Outer Realm Protoss attack had ended in failure. The era hadn't been destroyed, but the Outer Realm Protoss had lost 2 divine kings and many elite gods. However, this wasn't Ji Yuan's doing. It was the result of the god race's infighting. At most, Ji Yuan had reaped the spoils of war. Even so, Ji Yuan had suffered a fatal blow. The talisman his mother had given Zhou Wu had resurrected the dead. The resurrected were several times stronger than they'd been when they were alive. Their wanton destruction and slaughter were practically a disaster for the era. Not only that, but the resurrected also had the ability to infect others. It was like the zombies in the modern world's movies. After scratching someone, they could infect them and turn them into the same kind as the resurrected. For a time, the era was plunged into misery and suffering. Fortunately, there was no threat from the outside, so the era's great emperors could throw themselves into the fray without worry. Quite a few experts who'd once lived in seclusion lent a helping hand when the era was in trouble. The situation was still terrible, but it was gradually under control. Chaos City, Alliance Headquarters. News of Yi Zichen's transcendence spread like wildfire through Zhuamo's official account. It was also because of his transcendence that the Demon Clan and the Divine Clan were truly united. Of course, that didn't mean they were all unified. There were still quite a few unscrupulous cultivators among the Yao and God realms who wanted to take advantage of the chaos to plunder resources that would benefit them. However, they hadn't expected Yi Zichen to transcend. Just as they were about to give up resisting, the Great Alliance voted to reject their request to take them in. As a result, the current era wasn't just purging the zombie-like resurrected cultivators, it was also dealing with the wantonly inciting conspirators. As for Yi Zichen, who'd transcended. Wah! I'm really going to break down. A series of miserable shrieks sounded out from behind a mountain of documents. Before long, Yi Zichen shot to his feet. Only now did everyone realize that he'd been sitting in front of the table the entire time. It was just that the pile of documents had completely blocked his view. Currently, the Yao and God realms had sent him battle reports and requests for resources. Yi Zichen didn't go out to suppress the rebellion. Instead, he stayed behind to deal with them. Because to the gods and Yao, Yi Zichen was the only one who could truly do it. Truly fair. I'm done. I'm done. I want to go out. I'd rather fight those zombies than stay here and look at these shitty things. What the hell is this? A substandard god artifact and 2 bottles of elixirs, and they even need to send me a document? What's even more despicable is that they say they need cotton-padded clothes when the weather is cold. Do they think I'm the head of logistics? The document in his hand was thrown to the ground. Not long after, a beautiful figure appeared beside him and gently picked up the document from the ground. What can we do about it? This is what the Alliance voted for. All resources have been sent to the 10th Divine Mountain. Right now, all of the Yao and God Realms resources, down to a single piece of paper, are here for us to allocate. If they don't do this, what else can they do? It was none other than Xiaoyumei. She was just as warm and gentle as ever. She knew that Yi Zichen was rather impatient, so she smiled warmly and hooked her finger towards the documents on the table. The documents floated neatly behind her. Since you're tired, take a break. I'll take care of this. Yi Zichen couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He wanted to take the documents back, but she gently pushed him away. It's fine. Rest well. You haven't slept for half a month because of Jiyuan. Chapter 1862. This voice didn't come from Xiaoyumei. Yi Zichen followed the sound and saw Su Meier smiling warmly at him. However, this seemingly gentle smile contained the feeling of gnashing her teeth. At the same time, many gazes fell upon him. Their gazes were all filled with, "Is it me?" Yi Zichen sensed the murderous gazes and couldn't help but shrink back. At this moment, everyone in the hall stood up from their couches. Zuemo, Pu Jingwan, Xiao Yan, Yin Shang, Go Yuzhan, and the 5 elemental fairies. Every single one of them had a stack of documents similar to Yi Zichen's. "Isn't it you, mighty Emperor Star? Have you forgotten what the great emperors proposed half a month ago before they left?" Yi Zichen recalled. "If the great emperors have no objection to this vote, then it's decided." The Ocean Emperor looked around. Gathered in front of the hall, which was less than 100 square meters in size, were all existences whose sneeze could shake the entire 3 realms. The 8 divine mountain emperors. The heads of the Yao sacred beast. The ancient race's 3 half-step transcendence experts. They'd come first to congratulate Yi Zichen on his transcendence, and second to discuss the problems the various races were facing, as well as the problems they would soon face. There was also the matter of the ambitious schemers who wanted to join the alliance. The vote just now had been for them, and in the end, no one supported their participation. The emperors nodded, then prepared to leave. However, just as they were about to leave, "Everyone, please wait a moment. There's something I'd like to discuss with you all." When the great emperors heard that, they all sat back down. Before Yi Zichen transcended, he'd held an important position among them. Now that he'd transcended, he could be considered the new era's administrator. The great emperors regarded his suggestions with even greater importance. "Please speak, Master of the Stars." "It's like this. Just now, the head of the White Tiger clan, Wei, mentioned that some Yao clans suffered heavy casualties due to a lack of resources." "That's right." Wei Chen, who had a scar on his eye, nodded. "Such a phenomenon is not rare in the demon race. At least, as far as I know, no less than 30 middle-sized and small-sized groups have been forced to abandon their territory due to the shortage of resources and outdated weapons. Has such a situation happened in the God race?" Reporting to Emperor Star, actually, The god race also has it. This happened on my northern divine mountain. Bitterness flashed through the ocean emperor's eyes. Within the god realm, the northern divine mountain suffered the heaviest casualties. On his way to the 10th divine mountain, Zhou Wu passed by the Sea of Innocence. Suddenly, the ocean emperor fell silent, and so did the other emperors. They all knew about this. The northern divine mountain bordered the 10th divine mountain. Zhou Wu had wanted to take Yi Zichen's life, so the northern divine mountain naturally became his last line of defense. At the time, the Sea of Innocence was practically destroyed, and practically none of the Holy Land's experts survived. The Sea of Innocence's holy land was destroyed, and its resources are nowhere to be found. The divine mountains have suffered heavy casualties to begin with. I can't send any resources to the disaster area right now. Then why didn't you tell us? The emperors who were on good terms with the ocean monarch all asked. What do you mean? You're in dire straits as well. Your demand for resources isn't any less than the northern divine mountains. Besides, I'm the emperor of the northern divine mountain, so this is my duty. How could I possibly trouble my dear friends? Said the ocean emperor. What are you saying? Our conditions are poor, but no matter how poor we are, we can still squeeze out some resources for you. I know, right? You're treating us like outsiders. The great emperors discussed the matter. Yi Zichen took a deep breath, then tapped the table. Great emperors, please wait a moment. In truth, I brought this up because I have an idea. Different clans suffer different kinds of attacks, and there are great disparities in disaster conditions as well. Some clans are in dire straits and lack resources, but for various reasons, they're too embarrassed to ask. Some clans are in dire straits and lack resources. They have enough resources and want to help, but they don't know where to send them. How about this? Let's organize our resources, then send them to a central location. Suddenly, all the great emperors in the hall fell silent. The few great emperors who had been clamoring for resources stopped talking too. Providing resources wasn't a problem, because it was up to them to decide how much to provide. But if they gave away all their resources and sent them to a single person, they'd be placing the entire clan's future on that person's shoulders. Disaster was right in front of them. Everyone should unite and work together to overcome this crisis. But it was impossible to say that they didn't suspect each other. Furthermore, many of the great emperors present had once stood against each other. If not for Yi Zichen's transcendence and the fact that they truly needed to work together, they wouldn't be sitting together. Great emperors, since none of you are saying anything, I'll take the lead. Just as this suggestion was about to fail, Great Emperor Chao Feng of the Society of Saints spoke up. If Star Lord Yi distributes resources, I'm willing to send all of the Divine Mountain's resources to Chaos City. If Star Lord Yi takes over, the Jade Lake is willing as well. The Nine-Tailed Fox clan can also send all their resources to Chaos City and accept a central command. The same goes for the Dragon clan. Do you remember now, my dear Master of the Stars? Su Meier smiled warmly and blinked repeatedly in front of Yi Zichen. Then you called all of us over and had us do your hard labor. Don't tell me you don't remember, my dear Master of the Stars? Ahem. He remembered now. These past few days, he'd been so overwhelmed by the requests for resources, he'd forgotten that he'd been the one to propose it. However, it seemed that back then, I think I already sent them their phones. If they needed resources, couldn't they just send it over? Why did they send so many letters? Some of them can use their phones to receive resources, but they feel like learning our pinyin is too troublesome, so they'd rather send us letters. Don't they understand voice input? That's because on the first day, I nearly went deaf from listening to voice input. It was so noisy. Tells Mo to cancel the voice message she sent to the software. Is that so? Yi Zichen didn't dare meet Su Meier's gaze. Instead, he looked at Yin Shang and Go Yuzhan. They both nodded. Yi Zichen instantly smiled sheepishly. Now you're complaining? Don't you feel any shame? These past few days, we've seen far more documents than you, and you've been complaining practically every single day. Could it be that after you transcended, your memory deteriorated and you forgot everything? Su Mei continued to smile faintly. Zichen really is too tired. Xiao Yumei explained for him. Big sister Yumei, you really don't need to speak up for him. To put it bluntly, he's just lazy. Don't even need to read these documents for him. Just give them to him. You've really spoiled him. If you keep spoiling him like this, he'll only get lazier and lazier. When Xiao Yumei heard this, she only smiled lightly and quietly placed the document on her desk. You spoil him too much. Su Mei was speechless. At that moment she was filled with regret. It would have been better for her to stay in the Nine-Tailed Fox clan and enjoy her life. She just had to find her sweetheart, and then find herself a man who worked day and night. Now that she thought about it, it really was too much of a loss. Yi Zichen's eyes darted around. Aside from Xiao Yumei and Yin Shang, everyone else in the hall, including Go Yuzhan, seemed to have a lot of opinions about him. I have to find a chance to disappear from their sight for a while, so they can settle down again. Bro. At that moment, the great sage walked in with a staff in hand. Chapter 1863. Truly, someone sent him a pillow just when he was about to doze off. The great sage's arrival had come at just the right time. If no one else had come, Su Mei would probably have gone on and on for several more hours. The atmosphere in the hall wasn't particularly good. Yi Zichen, as the cause of the problem, felt the need to go into hiding so that everyone could calm down. However, the person who'd come to find him was Elder Lin. Yi Zichen didn't think about what Goldenlight had said at all for half a month. In order to truly not think about it, Yi Zichen practically didn't sleep a wink. He was completely immersed in his work on Erayuan. His arrival had caused half a month's worth of perseverance to go up in smoke. Goldenlight's words reverberated through his mind. Take me there. Yi Zichen's tone didn't reveal the joy of escaping. It was heavy. This was because he knew very well that the moment he walked out of this hall, he might face something that would make him even more vexed and powerless. But he still had to face the problem. Since Elder Lin had come, he might as well go take a look. After experiencing so much, his heart was strong enough. The great sage nodded and left. Yi Zichen followed behind him, walking very slowly. Even Su Mei didn't accuse him of running away. He'd cunningly avoided everything. She could feel the heaviness of Yi Zichen's footsteps. It didn't seem to be an act. It truly came from the bottom of his heart. He's really working hard. Xiao Yumei sighed as she watched him leave. She's always been so understanding, gentle and kind. She wouldn't go looking for Yi Zichen's troubles. She was mature enough to understand just how suffocating Yi Zichen's burdens were. Humph. Serves him right. He's willing to keep everything to himself and not tell anyone. With that, Su Mei angrily sat down in her seat. She hooked her finger at Yi Zichen's documents and took the rest of them. What's the situation outside? On his way to Elder Lin's place, he asked the great sage about the situation outside in order to stop his imagination from running wild. He'd transcended Erayuan. However, he had been left in the chaotic city from the beginning to the end. He was like an ancient emperor who stayed in the palace all the time. His understanding of the country was completely dependent on the reports of the officials. Yi Zichen was pretty much the same. Sitting in Chaos City, he didn't have a particularly clear understanding of the current era. That's all. The great sage gave an ambiguous answer. Those who have been reborn aren't easy to deal with. Furthermore, their infection is a huge obstacle to their purge. Old Lord Taishang rushed to the scene a few days ago. Through blood samples, he began to develop medicine that could cure the infected. Old Lord Taishang has left the mountain. Yi Zichen smiled in response. His departure from the mountain also meant that he did not continue to refine the pills from before. If the god race's attack from the extraterritorial domain came to an end, then the refinement of the pills would naturally come to an end. If, then let him develop it. Yi Zichen thought about it, but didn't say anything else. Given the current situation, suppressing the infection was the most important thing. As for the refinement of the pill, he could put it aside for now. Yi Zi, I feel that you have a lot on your mind. Worry flashed through the great sage's eyes as he patted him on the shoulder. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. You've already done very well. If you have any problems, just tell me and Yang Jian. Although we might not be able to help you solve your problems, we can at least listen. It's fine. I've already transcended. What's there to worry about? It's just that I haven't slept in a long time, so I'm a little tired. Yi Zichen smiled, then stopped. I can sense Elder Lin's location. There's no need for you to escort me. I'll head over myself. Zhou Wu had wreaked havoc in Chaos City. Chaos City's once beautiful, picturesque city had been practically destroyed. Although the craftsmen had worked hard to restore some of Chaos City's former glory during the past 2 weeks, there were still signs of destruction. Elder Lin was currently in a temporary workshop that was provided for the craftsmen to rest in. Yi Zichen was rather puzzled by Elder Lin's decision to stay in Chaos City instead of the main palace. Outside, Elder Lin stood in the doorway and looked up at the sky. Elder Lin. A low voice lingered in his ears. Elder Lin came to his senses and saw Yi Zichen slowly approaching. He could tell from Yi Zichen's gaze that he was conflicted. Little did he know, Elder Lin felt the same way. God King Joy's mother's self-destruction had affected him deeply. For the past 2 weeks, he'd been immersed in grief and resentment at the man of golden light for his mother's indifference. However, in the end, he'd decided to seek out Yi Zichen. It wasn't that he approved of the man of golden light, but rather that he'd only approved of part of it. Perhaps his lord was still doing his best to defend himself. To them, Yi Zichen was indeed a possibility. For his lord's sake, he needed to bring Yi Zichen to that man and help him understand a little about his lord. With a good foundation, he'd be able to ask Yi Zichen to share his lord's worries in the future. As expected, you didn't go. Elder Lin looked at Yi Zichen, then up at the azure sky and smiled. Half a month had passed, but Yi Zichen was still in Chaos City. That was proof enough that he hadn't gone to the God Realm. Hey! Yi Zichen didn't know what to say, but he grinned. How could he possibly go of his own accord? He was certain that nothing good would come of it. He wasn't the type to go looking for trouble on his own initiative. I was waiting for you, wasn't I? If you hadn't led the way, I wouldn't have known who to look for in the God Realm. Besides, those outsiders hate me so much they'd gnash their teeth in hatred. If I went over rashly, wouldn't I be shot full of holes? You brat! Elder Lin had guessed that Yi Zichen wouldn't go of his own accord, which was why he'd come to Chaos City. Now that he'd said it like that, he had a good reason not to go. Let's go. Without saying anything unnecessary, a black vortex appeared on the streets of Chaos City, spinning in a counterclockwise direction. Yi Zichen didn't immediately approach. Instead, he stood there and asked a question that didn't really matter. Do you really have to go? Elder Lin could tell that he was inwardly unwilling to go. He didn't want to cause any more trouble. He already had enough on his shoulders. Do you want to return to the modern realm? Asked Elder Lin. Of course. But I've sealed the modern realm in ice. You can't go back. This simple sentence was enough to determine who was the absolute leader between the two. What Elder Lin wanted to express was simple. If he wanted to return to the modern realm, he needed to undo the seal. Until then, Yi Zichen couldn't refuse him. Yi Zichen couldn't help but smile wryly and shake his head. Being led around by the nose really felt terrible, but there were far too many people waiting to return to the modern realm. Wasn't it just a trip to the God Realm? Fine, I'll go. Chapter 1864. In the sky above the God Realm, the earth trembled violently. Quite a few gods stared intently at the sky. Before long, they saw a black hole appear in the sky. Elder Lin and Yi Zichen walked out, shoulder to shoulder. When the surrounding gods saw Elder Lin, after a brief moment of shock, they bowed deeply to him to show their respect. Elder Lin, you have quite the status. Elder Lin smiled but said nothing. Yi Zichen couldn't help but look around. What was going on? The God Realm's current situation was similar to the era's. Signs of destruction could be seen everywhere. Quite a few buildings had collapsed, and many of the God Realm's gods were wrapped in white bandages. The God Realm had been attacked? When they'd first arrived, this place had been just fine. Could it be that someone had attacked their home while they were attacking the era? Serves them right. Yi Zichen took delight in their misfortune. Even though he'd transcended, he still felt both joy and anger. Most of the era's current predicament had been caused by the God Realm. They'd wholeheartedly wanted to destroy the era, but in the end they'd lost 2 God Kings. Now their home had been invaded. This was too satisfying. Although he hadn't been the one to lead the attack, seeing the God Realm's people in such discomfort delighted Yi Zichen, the era's Lord of Stars. Elder Lin didn't seem interested in the God Realm's invasion. He didn't even look at them, nor did he pay them any mind. Instead, he dashed toward the tallest building. Yi Zichen followed close behind. Hey, look at that person behind the King of the Laws. One of the gods pointed at Elder Lin and Yi Zichen, who were already a distance away. His eyes flashed with shock. If I remember correctly, that's the 3rd era's Lord of the Stars. Really? Are you sure? I was there when the God King of Destruction's divine sea was sealed. That person really is the era's Lord of the Stars. I heard he's already transcended. What's he doing here? Elder Lin, lead the way. I'm afraid he's here to negotiate terms or make peace. At that moment, a white-haired old man suddenly appeared around the gods. The old man's back was hunched, as if he'd reached the end of his life. When they saw him, the gods trembled in fright and hurriedly retreated. Master Bai. From the expressions of these gods, it could be seen that he had a very high status in the god race. It was just that the god race addressed him as, if it was a master god, they would call him a master god. A god king was a god king. This old man didn't have any title. He was just Master Bai. It was also special. Mr. Bai, you just said. The old man hunched his back and looked at the 2 people who were approaching the tallest building in the distance. Even though he looked old, his eyes were not the least bit turbid. Is it that hard to understand? Master Bai shook his head and pointed at the land under the God Clan. Our God Clan is already in a precarious situation. Outside, there are many God Kings eyeing the God Clan covetously. Internally, 2 God Kings have died, and Planet Lord Epoch has transcended. I believe that His Majesty Divine Emperor will not treat Ji Yuan with an unyielding attitude. Most likely, he wants to make peace with Ji Yuan's celestial lord. When the extraterritorial deities heard this, it was hard for them to accept it. The extraterritorial deities used to be so glorious. The 10,000 races worshipped him, not daring to fight against him. In recent years, the other planes races had developed rapidly. Only the extraterritorial deities had stagnated. Now 2 more God Kings had fallen, and they even wanted to make peace with Ji Yuan. Don't be too disappointed. This is the general trend. Ji Yuan is different from the other planes. He's too close to us. If they harbor enmity against us, then we really might face our end. The old man looked intently in the direction Elder Lin and Yi Zichen had gone, then sighed. His Majesty Divine Emperor will make a wise decision. Don't let your imaginations run wild. Go do what you need to do. The tall tower soared into the clouds. The pagoda in front of them was even taller than the ancient race's pagoda. From the looks of it, the top was already in the land of primal chaos. The pagoda had a retro feel to it. Even with Yi Zichen's experience, he couldn't tell what material it was made of. This is... Yi Zichen stopped in front of the pagoda and pointed at it. "The divine imperial palace where the God Emperor lives," replied Elder Lin, then pushed open the door and entered. The divine imperial palace? In other words, that golden light was the God Emperor. In truth, Yi Zichen wasn't all that surprised. He'd already considered this possibility, but he hadn't given it much thought. Now, he was sure that Golden Light was the God Emperor, and he and Elder Lin were both his subordinates. The God Emperor and the King of the Laws. Two of the world's peak existences were both his subordinate. This was truly shocking news. It was different from the other God Kings' palaces. There were no deities around the divine imperial palace, much less any sort of defense. Elder Lin walked through countless floors of the pagoda, but he didn't see a single deity or other living beings. "He's here." When they reached the top, Yi Zichen, who'd followed Elder Lin, saw a man sitting on a platform. The man was tall and muscular, and on the stone table in front of him was a battle-axe. Just the sight of it was enough to make one's skin crawl. The top of the pagoda was just as Yi Zichen had expected. The top of the pagoda was shrouded in primal chaos. He couldn't sense any laws or Tao around it. The elements were abundant, but they couldn't be used. The man pointed at the two chairs in front of him. Elder Lin walked up and sat down with a cold expression, while Yi Zichen also sat down. "You old man, you still can't get over it," the man said with a smile. "I'm not you. I can't remain indifferent in the face of the Holy Sun's death. Looks like you've been a divine emperor for too long that you've forgotten your identity," Elder Lin angrily rebuked. "You're hurting me." The man shook his head helplessly. "Others can doubt my loyalty to the Lord, but you can't, can you?" Old Lin snorted coldly but didn't comment. There was resentment, and he really couldn't forgive the man in front of him for ignoring the death of the saint. But his loyalty to his master, there was no need to doubt. "You really think too highly of the saint," Yi Futian said. The man sighed again. "After so many years, I've finally figured it out. The Lord left the Holy Sun here only to leave a possibility. If he had really taken a liking to the Holy Sun, he wouldn't have been gone for so long. In the eyes of the Lord, the race, prosperity is far more important than the Holy Sun." "Are you trying to say that the Lord is indifferent?" "No, I feel like the Lord is a true hero." The man's gaze was resolute and unquestionable. "He's willing to give up his personal feelings for the sake of the race. I truly admire his righteousness." "You can give up on the Holy Sun. He no longer has that possibility." The two of them looked at each other. Neither had any intention of backing down. From the moment he sat down, Yi Zichen was completely confused. All of a sudden, he couldn't help but that? "What exactly are you two talking about? Don't you think you should explain it to me?" Only then did the man and Elder Lin look towards him. "I nearly forgot." Chapter 1865. Forthright. This was Yi Zichen's first impression of the God Emperor. "It's an honor to meet you." Yi Zichen cupped his hands in greeting, then smiled. "There's no need to introduce me, is there? I'm sure you already know me." "Of course not." The God Emperor waved his hand. His rugged face was accompanied by a thunderous voice. "Star Lord Jiyuan, I've long since heard of your name. Two of our foreign god race's god kings died at your hands. It would be difficult for me to not recognize you." Was he intentionally mentioning the two god kings? Yi Zichen knit his brows. What was the meaning of this? God King's joy and freedom's deaths had nothing to do with Jiyuan. He was sure the God Emperor knew this. "Your Majesty, this has nothing to do with us." I know. I was just saying." The God Emperor laughed. "Star Lord Yi, don't be so suspicious." Yi Zichen didn't deny it. They were in the God realm, not Yi Zichen's home ground. He'd arrived out of the blue. Who knew what the God Emperor was thinking? If he wanted to use this as an excuse. But then again, if he really wanted to, given his cultivation, Yi Zichen wouldn't be able to resist. Even though he'd transcended, sitting in front of the God Emperor made him feel like there was an insurmountable chasm between them. This wasn't Yi Zichen looking down on himself. It was the truth. Yi Zichen had transcended, but the God Emperor had been one of the strongest experts in the world since the primordial chaos began. As time passed, his cultivation hadn't stagnated. However, Yi Zichen still couldn't figure out who would be his master. What would the existence above him be like? Could he destroy galaxies in the blink of an eye? Star-Lord Yi, you're absolutely right. At this moment, Shen Guanglong, who was sitting boldly on the chair, laughed. Yi Zichen's expression instantly grew unsightly. He'd spied on his inner thoughts. As if noticing Yi Zichen's frown, the God Emperor couldn't help but feel apologetic. I had no intention of spying on you, Star-Lord Yi. But you still did it. Yi Zichen didn't give the God Emperor any face. Even though his heart could be read, it was only because his realm was not high enough. However, no one would be happy to see this kind of person whose inner thoughts had been peeked out. Even if they could not say much due to the other party's realm, they would not greet him with a smile. Be careful. Little friend Yi is also considered this old man's friend, Elder Lin said. I really didn't mean it. It just so happened that Star-Lord Yi thought of His Excellency, so I couldn't help but say it out loud. Next time, I will definitely pay attention. The God Sovereign laughed. Be careful next time. What was the meaning of this? Next time, be careful not to say what you think? He really was a clever little devil. Yi Zichen's expression darkened, but he didn't say anything. The God Emperor was actually just joking to lighten the mood. In the end, it seemed that his joke wasn't funny at all. Helplessly, he could only put on a serious expression and say solemnly, Star-Lord Yi, do you know why I called you over? He rolled his eyes. When Yi Zichen heard that, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. Wasn't this question **T? If he knew why he'd come here, he wouldn't have come at all. He could have just stayed in the first era. Star-Lord Yi, do you know where this place is? When he saw Yi Zichen remain silent, the God Emperor changed the subject. Was this the God Emperor's bad taste? What was this place? The God Race. Although Yi Zichen didn't know what to say, he played along. No. As the God Emperor shook his head, Yi Zichen suddenly sensed something. The main point was coming. Outsiders call this place the God Race, but it actually has another name. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes and waited for the God Emperor to continue. Elder Lin couldn't bear to watch any longer. This is the primal ground. Old man, don't steal my words, all right? I should be the one saying that, said the God Emperor in displeasure. You're talking too much. Little friend Yi and I are both very busy. We don't have time to waste on you, snorted Elder Lin. It was a bit too much. In truth, the God Emperor could have just gotten straight to the point. Yi Zichen liked this sort of communication. But if the God Emperor's words were really useful, Yi Zichen was willing to satisfy the old man's desire to keep him in suspense and wait for him to reveal everything bit by bit. Old Lin is right. This is the primal ground. The God Emperor glared at Elder Lin, then repeated himself. However, he didn't just repeat himself. He also explained the primal ground. I presume you definitely don't know what the primal ground is. The primal ground is the region at the beginning of heaven and earth. Your era and many other planes only formed after the primal ground was created, said Elder Lin. Elder Lin ignored the God Emperor. When Yi Zichen heard this, he looked outside the primal chaos. The beginning of heaven and earth. In other words, all the planets in the universe had come into being from here. Star-Lord Yi, you should know about the Milky Way, right? I do. If you asked people from other eras, they probably wouldn't even know what the Milky Way was. But as someone who'd lived in the modern realm before, the Milky Way was all too familiar. Earth was located in the Milky Way. In truth, I've always marveled at Star-Lord Yi's planet as well. It clearly doesn't have much energy for cultivators to live on, but you rely on your own intelligence to travel beyond the planet's surface and discover the vast universe's secrets, said the God Emperor. You know about Earth? Naturally. I've traveled the myriad realms, and I have old friends on Earth, so I've naturally been there as well. When I saw how you lived on Earth, I couldn't help but gasp in amazement, laughed the God Emperor. Then I truly must thank you for sparing Earth's life. Why do you say that, Star-Lord Yi? The God Emperor didn't understand. Given your cultivation, I'm afraid you could destroy Earth with a single sneeze. I'm just thankful that you didn't do anything out of line on Earth, and let me enjoy 20 years of peace. Ha ha ha, Star-Lord Yi is truly an interesting person, laughed the God Emperor. The Divine Emperor laughed upon hearing this. No matter what I want to do, the old fellow beside you will not give way. He likes Earth very much. Yi Zichen didn't comment on this. Yi Zichen had no way of knowing how Elder Lin felt about Earth. He wasn't interested in finding out. What he cared about was, does any of this have anything to do with what you're going to tell me today? Yes. You can also say it doesn't. The God Emperor laughed inexplicably. I just mentioned Earth in passing, but the Milky Way is the main point. What? Are you trying to say that the Milky Way actually belongs to a certain major power? Yi Zichen seemed to be joking. Back in the modern realm, he'd thought about this sort of thing before. Chapter 1866. The atmosphere was indescribably solemn. When he saw the God Emperor's solemn expression, Yi Zichen didn't dare ask any more questions. He glanced at Elder Lin, only to see him nod. The Milky Way really did have its own rights. At the same time, the solemn God Emperor spoke up. It seems Star-Lord Yi has sensed it. As expected of someone Elder Lin and I have taken a liking to. You're right, the Milky Way belongs to our master. Don't. Sensed it my ass. He just said it casually. Who knew the Milky Way really did have its own rights? He was just a blind cat running into a dead mouse. Sensed it. He didn't have that ability. He wanted to explain, but it seemed the God Emperor didn't want him to either. Fine. I'll admit it. I'll just pretend I sensed it. For Star-Lord Yi to have sensed it, you truly are extraordinary. The God Emperor's eyes brimmed with admiration. Yi Zichen didn't deserve such praise. However, he didn't say anything. He merely rubbed his head and smiled wryly. Your lord is truly a capable man. But of course, when he mentioned his master, the God Emperor couldn't help but reveal a look of reverence. Even Elder Lin's eyes brimmed with reverence. Our master is the master of the Milky Way. Even in the vast universe, he stands at the peak of sin. Society, the master of the Milky Way. Just the sound of it was frightening. Then are you two generals under the master of the Milky Way? Asked Yi Zichen. How is that possible? How can we compare to the generals? The God Emperor shook his head. Elder Lin and I are merely the master of the Milky Way's gatekeepers. Gatekeepers? To put it bluntly, they were just gatekeepers. But judging from the pride in the God Emperor's eyes, being gatekeepers for the master of the Milky Way should be an extremely glorious thing. From this, one could see. The master of the Milky Way was indeed a major power. If Elder Lin and the God Emperor were only gatekeepers, then the generals under him were naturally stronger than the two of them, not to mention the master of the Milky Way himself. The master of the Milky Way's glory is limitless. Countless galaxy lords view our master as their leader, and the Milky Way is the largest galaxy. There are many geniuses in the galaxy, and the Milky Way galaxy's position has been consolidated. The Divine Emperor's eyes were filled with emotion as he looked up and recalled the past. Actually, Yi Zichen didn't want to disturb him at a time like that, but he couldn't help but say something. The biggest? Was the Divine Emperor living in a dream? Modern science told Yi Zichen that the Milky Way was one of the many galaxies. Since there was a Lord of the Milky Way, there were naturally other Lords of the Milky Way. The biggest? That was the problem. Science in the modern world had found that the Milky Way was not the largest galaxy. The God Emperor was probably living in a dream when he said it was the largest. It was not a problem to worship the master of the galaxy, but he had to speak the truth. Did he really think that he was an idiot who could fool him as he pleased? Is there a problem? The Emperor frowned. Well, as far as I know, the Milky Way. I know what you want to say. The Emperor God waved his hand. You want to say that the Milky Way is not the largest galaxy, right? When the God Emperor said that, Yi Zichen panicked a bit. He couldn't possibly kill them to silence them. Just like the joke in the past. Why did you kill me? Answer: you know too much. Yi Zichen licked his lips when he thought of that possibility. He nodded once again. Fortunately, the God Emperor didn't kill Yi Zichen like the joke. Instead, he confirmed Yi Zichen's words. You're right, the current Milky Way is not the largest. Then, because the current Milky Way was created by my lord. His words were shocking. When the God Emperor said that, Yi Zichen had to admit that he was truly shocked. The Milky Way was created by someone. Created by someone? Something like that? They've searched the modern realm for so long, yet they haven't even figured out 1% of the Milky Way. It was created by someone. Who would believe that? Then, the Milky Way you mentioned. With that, Yi Zichen saw a hint of sadness flash across both Elder Lin and the God Emperor's eyes. It was destroyed. The God Emperor's tone was indescribably solemn. This was probably the most unbelievable thing in his life, and also the most difficult thing to accept. The Milky Way, the largest galaxy in the universe, the Milky Way that his lord presided over, was destroyed just like that. The matriarch died in battle. 10 odd generals died in battle as well. Only his lord was left with a single breath. He used all of his wealth to create a miniature version of the Milky Way and gave it life. What's more, he placed the citizens of the Milky Way, the weak races, into this miniature version of the Milky Way. Until now, there were still people from the original Milky Way galaxy in this galaxy. They had not realized it yet, nor did they know that the Milky Way galaxy they had lived in had long been destroyed in the universe. Then what about the Master of the Milky Way? Didn't you say that the Master of the Milky Way was the strongest existence in the universe? Didn't the Milky Way produce many geniuses? Why was the Milky Way destroyed? Internal strife, said the God Emperor. The Tsangyue galaxy, exclaimed Elder Lin. The Tsangyue galaxy used to be a subsidiary of the Milky Way. The Master of the Galaxy was the third general under his lord. Back then, the Master of the Tsangyue galaxy told his lord that an unparalleled weapon had appeared in a black hole. His lord did not suspect anything and led his 7 generals to fight for it. However, he fell for Master Tsangyu's trap. Yeah, the God Emperor sighed. His lord trusted Tsangyu too much. The black hole didn't have the ultimate treasure Tsangyu spoke of. There were enemies in the universe that couldn't be calculated with numbers. It was only then that we realized that Tsangyu had colluded with the people from beyond. Tsangyu wanted to make a comeback, while our lord was a thorn in the side of the other races. The two sides worked together, causing the 7 generals who followed our lord to die tragically in the black hole. Not even their corpses were left behind. In the galaxy, the God Emperor didn't continue. He didn't want to remember that scene either. Even so, Yi Zichen could still imagine how terrible it was. But since the Master of the Milky Way was able to create this galaxy after it was destroyed, it means that he didn't die. Yes, even now we will die if we don't recognize our Lord. He's too strong. No one in the universe can kill him. He might still be fighting against Tsangyu and the other races from beyond. He's fighting for the Milky Way, for the people who died in the Milky Way, and for the matriarch. Then, why are you looking for me? Suddenly, Yi Zichen's heart cleared up. He seemed to have guessed why the God Emperor had called him here. Chapter 1867. That's a bit heavy. A long time ago, Yi Zichen was a salted fish with almost no illusions about his future. At most, he would be a brick in his country, moving wherever he was needed. This was the heaviest responsibility he could think of at that time. At most, he would have to shoulder the responsibilities of a father and a husband. But it was that magical day. His disappointment in his relationship pushed him to the lowest point of his life. At the time, he didn't feel like he had anything to lose, but he just had to enter that mysterious chat group. The God of Fortune's red packet was like a ray of light that woke him from his lowest point. After exchanging the money for gold and silver, the first thing he thought of was revenge. To be honest, at the time, all he could think of was revenge. He wanted to make Yao Yu regret everything she'd done in order to release his body and mind. That's what he did. But now that he thought about it with his relatively mature mentality, his actions at that time were somewhat extreme. After that mysterious chat group became the greatest help to his growth. He got to know the great sage, Yang Jian, third Prince Neza, Marshal Tianpeng, and a series of other immortals that he had only heard of in myths and on television. His life became richer, and his own life blossomed like a flower. Beauties followed, and the future was bright. His happy life was about to begin, but he had no idea that the future was pressing down on him like a demon's hand. The modern realm was frozen. His roommates had died because of him. Guilt was buried deep in his heart. He was chased out of the frozen world. When he went to the immortal, Yao and demon realms, he could truly breathe the same air as the deities in the chat group. But from then on, he shouldered the responsibility of bringing the people around him back to the modern realm. Li Jiai's fear of the unfamiliar world and longing for the modern realm, Su Yan and Xia Keek's longing for the modern realm, Xiao Yumei's gentleness subconsciously revealed her longing for the modern realm. All of this weighed heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't even straighten his back. He slowly walked forward with a hunched back, each step leaving a heavy footprint in the path of his life. He really was too tired. But he couldn't give up, and he didn't dare to think about giving up. He was afraid he'd never be able to lift his tense nerves again. He could only continue to work hard, for the future, and for the future of their smiling faces. The immortal demon race had been annihilated. He, who had long since become an immortal king, ascended to the god race. Yes, god race. He still hadn't returned to the modern world, but an even heavier burden had found him. He was the Era Star Lord. Soon, the era would come to an end. As the Emperor Star's Lord, he had to bear this responsibility and allow the era to transcend. It was really tough. When Yi Zichen was alone in the middle of the night, he would always look up at the starry sky as the memories of the modern realm echoed through his mind. This was probably the only thing that had supported him all this way. He believed that everything he had done was to prepare for his return to the modern world. When he truly transcended and the era was safe, he could bring his women and brothers back to the modern world, living the most ordinary life. He was wrong again. When he truly transcended, he was welcomed by the Divine Emperor and learned of a possibility that he had never imagined. The Milky Way. Defend the galaxy. Avenge the galaxy. If it were anyone else, they would definitely feel their blood boil with passion. They would say some impassioned words and place their lives in the hands of the Divine Emperor and the others. Yi Zichen didn't want that. His refusal came from the bottom of his heart. He didn't want his life to be filled with all sorts of troubles. His original intention was to be an ordinary person. Why did he have to become like this? It was as if he had become the savior of the world. Sorry, but he didn't feel like he was that great. Besides, he didn't want everyone who cared about him to worry about him anymore. Xiao Yumei, Su Yan, Kiki, who hadn't been filled with anxiety when he was in danger. He didn't want the people important to him to ever show such fearful expressions again. He could do anything for the sake of the world, but all of that was within his power. As for protecting the Milky Way and avenging it, that was too much for him. He felt like it wasn't something he could do. Yi Zichen let out a deep sigh. A hint of apology flashed through his eyes, then he crossed his arms and smiled at the Divine Emperor. Sorry, please allow me to refuse. The moment he said that, Both Elder Lin and the Divine Emperor's eyes flashed with shock. Yi Zichen was the only possibility they could see in the Milky Way. In their eyes, everyone else was nothing more than ordinary people. They were amazing, but they couldn't grow out of the shackles their Lord had laid down for them. Yi Zichen's refusal wasn't just a rejection of their request, it also destroyed all of their hope. He pushed them, who were already on the verge of death, over the edge. Their Lord needed help. His future would be too lonely if he struggled to hold on by himself. Little friend Yi. Elder Lin frowned, then said sincerely, "Their Lord needs your help. The Lord needs your help. The Milky Way galaxy is our common home. Your close friends and family all live in the Milky Way. It can be said that protecting the Milky Way is protecting your family, and avenging the Milky Way is also fighting for resources for their future. If you accept us now, then we'll give you time to grow. When the Milky Way is rebuilt, you will be the greatest person in the Milky Way besides their Lord. Everyone around you will enjoy the Milky Way's gift." Sorry, Yi Zichen remained unmoved. "You." Anger flashed through Elder Lin's eyes, as if he was angry at the person he'd chosen to ignore the bigger picture. "Do you not want to return to the modern realm?" A threat. Elder Lin knew that this sort of behavior was terrible, and might even backfire on him. However, he had to do this for his Lord's safety and the future of the Milky Way. He hoped that Yi Zichen would still have some lingering feelings for the modern realm. This caused him to hesitate, unable to refuse clearly. He was wrong. However, the moment Elder Lin said that, Yi Zichen's hands trembled violently. Then he looked at Elder Lin in disbelief. That person had always been highly respected in Yi Zichen's heart. Even though he'd used some tricks to push Yi Zichen into this sort of trouble, he was still kind. Yi Zichen was very suspicious of why Elder Lin would say something like that. Chapter 1868. Instantly, Elder Lin slammed the table. The surrounding primal chaos changed slightly, and an invisible cage locked the three of them inside. In this primal chaos world, where there was no elemental energy, Elder Lin was still able to control the power of the laws. But what did he mean by doing this? Force him to submit? The mockery in his eyes intensified. It seemed like he had misjudged Elder Lin in the past. He had thought that he was a highly respected elder, but it seemed that there was nothing special about him. "Elder Lin, are you trying to trap me here?" As soon as these words were spoken, Elder Lin was put on the spot. In truth, he was doing this purely because he didn't want Yi Zichen to leave. The way he saw it, Yi Zichen's refusal was acceptable, but it wasn't as if there was no room for negotiation. He wanted to keep him here and listen to his conversation with the Divine Emperor. Perhaps a turning point would come. But now, regardless of whether it was Yi Zichen's expression or his words, or even his actions, all of them put him in a difficult position. There was no way out. "Elder Lin, I came with you because I trust you. I've always felt that you're a benevolent elder, and I believe that you can understand why I refuse. But you threatened me with the present world, and now you've trapped me here, not letting me leave. I'm really disappointed. I'm not disappointed in you, but in myself. I'm disappointed that I didn't see people deeply enough and made friends with the wrong people, which caused me to fall into this whirlpool." Yi Zichen looked straight at Elder Lin. There was nothing for him to avoid. Right now, he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He wasn't afraid of looking into anyone's eyes. "You're threatening me with the modern world? Fine, I'll be frank with you here. I really care about the modern world, not just for me or my loved ones. We all want to return to the modern world to live. We're really tired of the disputes here. I've always been working hard to return to the modern realm, but if you're using this to threaten me, then I can only say that you're overthinking things. This is not enough to be used as a bargaining chip to threaten me. Why don't you use this kind of threat to trap me here and force me to submit like you are doing now? Answer." Hesitation flashed in Elder Lin's eyes. Actually, his thoughts weren't that bad. However, his behavior really wasn't very honorable. Yi Zichen's words left him with no way of retorting. Then what do you want now, Lord God Emperor and Monarch of the Laws? Do you want to use force to force me to sign an unfair treaty with you? I'm a person who won't give up until I hit the southern wall, and I won't shed a tear until I see the coffin. Even if it's the two of you, I'm willing to give it a try. Starlight surged. There was no way to mix the elements here, so the elemental spirits of the 5 elements naturally did not have their unique effects. Starlight was a technique that utilized the power of the stars. As long as there was starlight as an emperor star, he would be able to use the power of the stars there. Azure blue starlight enveloped him, and the Xianyuan sword slowly appeared on his arm. The golden light and the blue starlight blended together, making the divine palace exceptionally dazzling at best. It was obvious. Yi Zichen's actions told Elder Lin and the others that if they wanted him to submit, they'd have to beat him into submission. As for how to make him yield, that was up to him. Elder Lin and the God Emperor looked at each other, but neither showed any signs of wanting to fight. This wasn't the result they wanted. They'd brought Yi Zichen here to discuss things, not to fight him. There was no room for negotiation with Elder Lin. From the moment he sealed this place, he couldn't come down. If he removed the seal, it would seem like he was afraid of Yi Zichen. If he didn't remove the seal, it would seem like he really wanted to force Yi Zichen into submission. All he could do now was sit. The God Emperor knew this, so he laughed heartily. Star Lord Yi! Star Lord Yi! The God Emperor laughed heartily and clapped his hands. He stepped forward, approached Yi Zichen, and tried to pat him on the shoulder. He'd long since learned from the Ocean Emperor that a God King could instantly seal their spiritual seas. The God Emperor was naturally even more powerful than a God King. No one knew whether or not he was trying to seal Yi Zichen, so before he could reach out, Yi Zichen took a few steps back. The God Emperor had wanted to ease the tension, but his hand hung awkwardly in midair. He looked at his hand, laughed self-deprecatingly, then took a few steps back. Star Lord Yi, you're being far too careful. How could I not be careful? With the God Emperor and the King of Laws working together, who would dare say they weren't on full alert? If I'm even the slightest bit careless, I'm afraid I'll fall into your trap, snorted Yi Zichen. Star Lord Yi, you really don't need to be so wary of us. We invited you here out of sheer sincerity. The Divine Emperor said with a wry smile. We have no ill intentions. Just now, old Lin really was a bit impulsive. That's why he said those words and acted so viciously. It's not that he's a bad person, but Star Lord Yi, you should know that old Lin isn't that sort of person. Yi Zichen didn't deny this. He'd always had a good impression of Elder Lin. He'd only followed him to the God realm because of his trust in him. Unfortunately, after arriving here, Elder Lin had taught him a vivid lesson. He's just too loyal. The God Emperor shook his head and sighed bitterly. It's not just him. If I were in his shoes, I might do the same. It's for no other reason than the fact that you're far too important to us. Yi Zichen said nothing. I know that you don't care about the Lord's importance, but you're not like us. You can't empathize with him. We don't have the right to impose our opinions on you. We can't throw all our hopes to you just because of our incompetence, and let you carry our dreams with you. We can't let you carry our dreams and do what we want. That's very selfish. I apologize. As he spoke, the God Emperor really did bow deeply to Yi Zichen. Truly, we're very sorry for our actions just now. We were too desperate and forced a grudge against you. In truth, I didn't mean for you to agree right now. What? Asked Yi Zichen. Right now, you're still too weak. Even old Lin and I can't help the Lord. You can imagine what he's facing. If you go now, you'll just be throwing your life away. That's why you're just a possibility in our hearts, said the God Emperor. We'll do everything in our power to raise you so that you can grow to the point where you can help the Lord. This might take decades or centuries or millennia or even tens of thousands of years. Chapter 1869. It was all for a single possibility. The divine emperors of countless realms tried to persuade him in a pleading tone, as if their lips were about to break. As for Elder Lin, due to his past actions, he couldn't participate. However, from the look in his eyes, it was clear what kind of expectations he had for Yi Zichen. Logically speaking, the God Emperor and the others had already given him enough face. In truth, Yi Zichen didn't really want to antagonize them to the point where they'd clash head-on. Putting aside whether he had complete confidence in himself or whether he could really escape from the hands of the Divine Emperor and Elder Lin, he did not know whether he would be able to do so. He had billions of lives behind him. There were also countless relatives and close friends who were anxiously waiting for his return. Gradually, Yi Zichen's starlight dissolved into motes of starlight and returned to the primal chaos. His hostility gradually returned to his body. When the God Emperor and Elder Lin saw this, they were overjoyed. That was right. Neither the God Emperor nor Elder Lin wanted to fight Yi Zichen to the point of no return. Perhaps it was because they'd been too anxious earlier that they'd ended up in such dire straits, but if things could be repaired now, that would be for the best. Star Lord Yi, if that's the case, what do you think? The decision is up to me, right? Said Yi Zichen. Of course. The God Emperor nodded. Once you've grown strong enough to assist our Lord, even if Elder Lin and I wanted to force you to go, we'd have to be strong enough to do so. By then, even if we joined forces, we wouldn't be able to deal with you. The right to decide is naturally in your hands. Then, the God Emperor and Elder Lin's eyes brimmed with anticipation. These few short seconds were the longest torture they'd ever experienced in their lives. In their hearts, they hoped that Yi Zichen would nod. To tell the truth, they really didn't have the guts to trap him here and prevent him from returning. There was no need to even mention directly attacking him. At the end of the day, he was the only possibility. If they destroyed him, they'd lose all hope. The Milky Way galaxy, or rather their Lord, would truly have no hope. Yi Zichen hadn't done this on purpose. He didn't have the bad taste to use his hesitation to stir up the God Emperor and Elder Lin's emotions. His hesitation was completely based on the fact that he really couldn't make a decision. At this moment, he was also struggling in his sea of consciousness. If he gave up, he would naturally be relaxed. However, the Divine Emperor and Elder Lin had already spoken to this extent. If he refused, it would be too hurtful to them. In the long run, even the Milky Way with the Master of the Galaxy could be destroyed. Wouldn't the Milky Way, which was hastily created by the Master of the Galaxy, be discovered by the enemy? He believed that if the Tsangyue galaxy that the Divine Emperor mentioned knew that there was still a fire seed left in the destroyed Milky Way galaxy, he would definitely kill this potential threat at all costs. At that time, when the alien lifeforms from outside the galaxy came to this era, how could they survive? Agreeing to it might seem like the best decision right now, but the burden on his shoulders would become even heavier. He would think about these things all the time, and the burden on his heart, Yi Zichen really did not dare to think about it. Forget it. There had to be a few people who lived for others so that more people could live for themselves. If everyone selfishly thought about themselves, the world would become a mess. Alright, I agree. No one could understand how heavy Yi Zichen's heart was when he said those words. He agreed. His agreement meant that the heavy burden of the Milky Way galaxy's future was now resting on his not-so-broad shoulders. His shoulders, which were already very heavy to begin with, felt as if a 10,000-ton boulder had ruthlessly pressed down on him the moment he finished speaking, causing his legs to involuntarily bend a little. But he still had to continue moving forward, even if every step he took was difficult. He could only continue forward. That's great. The Divine Emperor and Elder Lin's eyes lit up with undisguisable joy. So long as Yi Zichen agreed, they could finally put down their worries. As for whether or not Yi Zichen would go back on his word, they weren't worried at all. Elder Lin had been paying close attention to Yi Zichen ever since he left the modern realm. Elder Lin had long since figured out what kind of person Yi Zichen was. Since Yi Zichen agreed now, he would naturally step up when the time came. Star Lord Yi, I express my gratitude to you on behalf of the entire Milky Way galaxy. The Divine Emperor reached out and grabbed Yi Zichen's hand, then shook it repeatedly. It was as if some philanthropist in the modern realm had donated money, and a leader had stepped forward to express his gratitude. In response, Yi Zichen couldn't help but smile sheepishly, or rather bitterly. At that moment, Elder Lin released his spatial seal. He stood to the side as if he wanted to say something, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get the words out. Elder Lin, it's all in the past now. Yi Zichen smiled at Elder Lin. Elder Lin's murky eyes trembled slightly as he nodded. Ha ha ha, Star Lord Yi truly has a heart as broad as the sea. As expected of someone the world has placed such high hopes on. Only someone with this kind of breadth of mind can let go of the world. The Divine Emperor rummaged through his library of compliments, then continued to shower Yi Zichen with praise. Right, Star Lord Yi, actually, I have a gift for you this time. A gift? The Divine Palace of Destruction. Yale had broken the rules and had his Divine Sea sealed. Now that his Divine Sea was sealed, he could no longer enjoy his former glory. The Divine Emperor had even placed him under house arrest, so he could only move about within the boundaries of the Divine Palace. He couldn't go to the new era, so he could only send his subordinates there on his behalf. However, having his Divine Sea sealed didn't affect his status in the hearts of the gods. Everyone knew that the seal was only temporary. Once it was removed, he would still be the God King of Destruction. It seems my luck is quite good. If I had gone with you, I fear I would have died outside the new era. Yale sat upon the throne of the Divine Palace of Destruction. Beneath him were the 11 overgods. The overgods had reported everything that had happened, but they'd learned of Freedom and Joy's deaths from the god race's intelligence agents. This was because when they returned to the god realm, Stark and Joy had yet to die. Your Majesty, you're exaggerating. If you hadn't had your Divine Sea sealed, the new era would have been destroyed long ago, said one of the overgods fawningly. That's true, but I really did have my Divine Sea sealed. As soon as he finished, Yale looked at the goddess of war with a smile on his face. His eyes were filled with gentleness. You were lucky to have listened to the war goddess. If you had stayed behind, you would have been caught up in the explosion as well. You should thank her for making the most rational decision at the most critical moment. It's no problem. I merely did what I had to do. Chapter 1870. Her smile faded. The moment he saw War Goddess' expression, Yale felt that the problem might be serious, and it might even affect him. Even though she didn't say anything, this feeling grew stronger. Speak. Yale raised his hand. War Goddess spoke. Just now, someone reported that Era Star-Lord came to the Outer Realm. The faces of the sovereigns in the hall all turned solemn. Era Star-Lord came to the Outer Realm at this time. One had to know that the Outer Realm celestial race and Ji Yuan were irreconcilable enemies. The witch race had attacked the Outer Realm celestial race, causing them to suffer heavy losses. 2 god kings had gone to Ji Yuan and self-destructed, humiliating the Outer Realm celestial race. Only by destroying them could they erase this humiliation. This humiliation. Was he here to provoke the Outer Realm celestial race? Where is he? Yale's eyes narrowed. He came with the King of the Laws, heading towards the Divine Palace. War Goddess squinted her eyes, her gaze solemn. My guess is, say no more. Yale snorted. He had already guessed what War Goddess wanted to say. Peace. That was definitely not going to happen. As long as he, Yale, was here, he would never let the Outer Realm celestial race make peace with Ji Yuan. God King of Destruction. At this moment, a white shadow suddenly appeared in the Shrine of Destruction. The Divine Emperor has ordered for the God King of Destruction to lead the northern gods to the Divine Palace. The Divine Emperor has something to announce. The white shadow came abruptly and left abruptly. The sharp voice was still echoing in the Divine Palace, but the shadow had already disappeared from the Divine Palace. The sovereigns in the hall all stared at Yale, who currently had a savage look on his face. It seems like it is as I guessed. The Divine Emperor really intends to, the goddess of war, who had always been good at reading people's words and body language, was now purposely bringing up what she was about to say as if she didn't have the slightest bit of insight. The ferocity in Yale's eyes intensified. Even though he had no god power, his body still emitted a heavy pressure. The sovereigns all secretly gulped. Yale, however, took a deep breath. He didn't believe it. 2 god kings died in Jiyuan, and the outer realm's celestial race was destroyed. The Divine Emperor could negotiate with Jiyuan, but he didn't believe that the gods of the extraterritorial divine race would agree to it as well. Sometimes, the power of public opinion was much greater than one's realm. He did not believe that the God Emperor could resist the power of the god race's public opinion and force a truce with Jiyuan. Take them to the Divine Palace. I would like to see what the Divine Emperor has to say. In front of the Divine Palace. When Yale's Northern God Clan's majestic army arrived at the Divine Palace, the people from the other 3 God clans had already taken their positions. Among them, emotional God King stood at the very front. That was the position closest to the Divine Palace, and also a position no God King could stand at. Unfortunately, the Pleasure God King and the Freedom God King had self-destructed, so the Southwest and Southwest God clans could only be led by the chief god. This was especially true for the God Palace of Liberty, which only sent the most ordinary god soldiers. The elite soldiers had already perished outside the epoch. Yale! Orbis! When the only 2 god kings of the god race met, because they didn't have a deep personal relationship, they only nodded at each other and stood in their respective positions. As for the Northern God Clan's army, they were commanded by the War Goddess, and they stood to the north of the Divine Palace. Golden light illuminated the world. Countless gods silently awaited the Divine Emperor's arrival. Just as the golden light appeared instantly, the gods of the 4 god clans bowed their heads. We greet the Divine Emperor. Their voices filled the air. When the gods looked at the golden light, their gazes were filled with reverence. As they bowed, the God Lord knelt on one knee, while the emotional God King and God King of Destruction bowed slightly as well. The golden light in the sky slowly dissipated. The Divine Emperor stood proudly in the sky like a heavenly deity, with Elder Lin and Yi Zichen by his side. At ease. A low, distant voice echoed through the surroundings. When the outsiders heard this, they rose to their feet. Thank you, Divine Emperor. When they looked up, they saw Elder Lin and Yi Zichen standing by the Divine Emperor's side. None of them were unfamiliar with Elder Lin. He was the king of the laws, and he'd frequently visited the outside god race. Apparently, he was on good terms with the Divine Emperor. As for the person beside him, Yi Zichen, Yale's pupils constricted. Quite a few of the Northern God race's gods recognized him as well. Could it be that the Divine Emperor really wanted to face the wrath of countless gods and announce this matter? I brought you here because I have something to announce to you. The Divine Emperor got straight to the point and pointed at Yi Zichen. Before that, let me introduce you to Yi Zichen, the Lord of the First Era, as well as a transcendent of the Third Era. Whoosh! The gods were in an uproar. The Lord of the First Era had come to the outside's territory? What was he doing here? Was he flaunting his era's power? 2 god kings had died for the First Era. Was he here to humiliate the god race? Quite a few gods revealed fury in their eyes as they announced Yi Zichen's identity. Among them, the Divine Palace of Liberty was the most resentful. Perhaps the Divine Emperor was deliberately hiding it, but he wanted to leave them with a final, good impression. The god race didn't know they were responsible for Stark's death. Right now, the god race still believed Yizichin was responsible for their and Stark's deaths. The divine palace of liberty didn't know the truth. To them, Yizichin was naturally their enemy. He was the one who killed their god king and destroyed their freedom paradise. As for the divine palace of pleasure, their reputation among the outsiders wasn't good to begin with, so they didn't really care about God King Pleasure's death. It seems they're all quite angry with me. Yizichin smiled wryly, but in the god's eyes, his wry smile seemed to be mocking them. For a moment, the crowd was in an uproar. Not bad. Yale nodded in satisfaction. This was exactly the scene he'd wanted to see. The entire god race was filled with disgust for Yizichin. There was no way to contain this sort of seething anger. He refused to believe the divine emperor would dare. All of you, shut up. Suddenly, the divine emperor's eyes narrowed and he roared. His angry roar was mixed with the might of an emperor, and when the gods heard it, it shook their hearts. For a moment, the entire divine palace fell silent. Star-Lord Yi is an honored guest. What a disgrace. The gods didn't say anything. Part of the reason they'd shouted just now was because the divine emperor's might was suppressing them, preventing them from expressing their emotions. Chapter 1871. The gods were in an uproar. Even God King of Destruction Yale was dumbfounded. The God Emperor's words reverberated in his mind. Alliance. This wasn't just a simple peace negotiation. He wanted to form an alliance with Jiyuan. If it was just a simple peace negotiation, there might be a chance that the peace treaty would be nullified in the future. Or perhaps when the time came for peace talks, the outside god realm could once again wield their sharp blades against Jiyuan. A similar situation had occurred in other planes before. But now they were forming an alliance. The gods couldn't understand the God Emperor's declaration. Jiyuan had killed two of their God King's mortal enemies. The God King's corpses hadn't even grown cold, and now the God Emperor wanted to form an alliance with Jiyuan? How could they not be disappointed? Especially those from the divine palace of freedom. When they heard this, they couldn't restrain their anger. Unfortunately, the one standing above them was the God Emperor, the supreme ruler of the outside god realm. His right to speak had absolute authority in the Outerium god race. No one could interfere with his thoughts. No matter how unwilling they were, all they could do was grit their teeth. Was it over, just like that? Were they really going to let Jiyuan form an alliance with the outside god realm? Were they really going to have no choice but to bury their hatred deep in their hearts? They needed someone to step forward and vent their dissatisfaction. Why? At that moment, someone really did step forward. This person was from the divine palace of freedom. He was a former overgod under Stark's command. His face was flushed red, and his brown eyes brimmed with hatred for Yizichin. Due to the suddenness of his voice, everyone looked in his direction. This overgod met everyone's gazes and the God Emperor's oppressive gaze. He walked to the front of the crowd and looked up at the God Emperor. Why should we form an alliance with Jiyuan? I don't understand. Someone dared challenge the God Emperor's authority at a time like this? Yizichin couldn't help but arch his brows. He admired this expert's boldness. There were so many gods, including the God Kings, and he was sure that most of them held a grudge against Jiyuan. Yet not a single one of them stepped forward. Even the God Kings obediently obeyed the God Emperor's orders. Only this person, judging from his aura, was a overgod. He dared question the God Emperor like this. How much did he hate Yizichin for him to be so daring? Do you have any objections to my decision? The divine emperor said expressionlessly after looking at him for a while. Yes, I have an objection. All the gods present could sense that the God Emperor was getting a little angry. No one dared to get on his bad side at this time. However, the overgod seemed to have reached a boiling point. He completely ignored the God Emperor's expression and the changes in the surroundings. He just stood there with his back straight. The divine emperor was staring at the divine emperor with eyes full of anger. Is this guy crazy? That's right. The Divine Emperor's expression has already darkened, yet he still wants an explanation. He seems to be from the Freedom God Palace. The death of the Freedom God King must have affected him greatly. I heard that many of the Lords of Liberty God Palace were handpicked by the Liberty God King. They have deep feelings for the Liberty God King. But even so, he can't treat the God Emperor like this. Isn't he afraid of death? The surrounding gods discussed stealthily. They didn't like war to begin with, and the deaths of the Freedom God King and Pleasure God King didn't affect them at all. As a result, they were still rational. They were shocked by the Overgod's words and secretly broke into a cold sweat on his behalf. Wonderful! Yale, the God King of Destruction, laughed inwardly. Finally, someone had stepped forward to object. This person definitely wasn't the only one. He was certain that his appearance would incite even more people to voice their objections. God Emperor, what are you going to do now? However, before a sneer could appear on Yale's face, the Divine Emperor in the sky gave him an answer without hesitation. You're not allowed to object. All you have to do is carry out my orders. The surrounding gods were dumbfounded. This was such a decisive answer. There was no room for doubt. They had to carry out his orders. In truth, such domineering words didn't sit well with the god realm. As soon as the words came out, a large number of gods started to clamor. They couldn't hear the specific content, but most of them were objecting to the God Emperor's arbitrary actions. Do you want to rebel? A thunderous voice boomed. Little did they know that this deterrence didn't have the same effect as before. The clamor among the gods grew louder and louder. The sovereign was panting raggedly as he pointed at the divine palace of liberty behind him. God Emperor, why should we listen to you? To put it bluntly, under your rule, the outer realm god race's national strength has become weaker and weaker. When the Darkness God King was still around, who in the billions of planes dared not bow down to the outer realm god race. But now, more and more planes are coveting the god race. That's nothing. As god race warriors, we're not afraid of any provocation. For our homeland, we're willing to shed our blood for our race. But now, you're telling us to form an alliance with the Era God race. The tiny Era God race, who exists like an ant, has now become the target of our fear. Out of fear, we want to form an alliance with him. Your Majesty, do you know that the Freedom God King and Joy God King have yet to die? Ji-Yuan is the Outer Realm God race's greatest enemy. You're willing to form an alliance with him at all costs, but have you ever asked us, the billions of warriors who have served the God race with our lives? You're arbitrary, but I'm telling you right now, we're not willing. Even if we die, we won't form an alliance with an enemy, nor will we express goodwill to an ant. The Overgod's words reverberated outside the divine palace. Due to his orders, a large number of God race warriors waved their weapons and shouted, "We will not form an alliance." It seemed like things had gotten out of hand. Yi Zichen subconsciously glanced at Elder Lin. To tell the truth, he really didn't understand how Ji-Yuan had provoked the Outer Realm God race. After all, Ji-Yuan was the real victim. Even if the Outer Realm God race had lost 2 God Kings, it was their own fault. Don't worry, he'll take care of it. Elder Lin's tone was very soft. When he looked towards the God Emperor, he saw that the God Emperor was still staring expressionlessly at the Overgod and the other gods. It seems like you've suffered quite a bit. The God Emperor smiled silently, then reached out with his right hand. Chapter 1872. The veins on the God Emperor's arms bulged, and the veins on the God King's face popped out. The God Emperor really didn't hold back. This sudden scene stunned many gods. Even God King of Destruction Yale stared blankly for a long time. Understood. No wonder these gods were so emotional. Logically speaking, the gods of the Outer Realm were shrouded in the shadow of the God Emperor all year round. Fear should come from the bottom of their hearts. Even if the God Emperor's actions displeased them, they were still intimidated by him all year round. They didn't dare to vent their anger. The God Emperor just now seemed to have stepped forward out of anger. But when it came to his subsequent words, he had already lost all rationality and was completely blinded by anger. As a God Emperor, he should treasure his hard-earned status and realm. He should know when to advance and when to retreat, and what was most beneficial to him. His actions and words had already puzzled Yale. Now that the God Emperor had captured emotional God King Orbis, everything became clear. The emotional God King was manipulating the emotions of the surrounding gods, using them to interfere with the announcement of the alliance. Are you done playing? The God Emperor grabbed the emotional God King. His eyes were filled with a piercing cold light as he narrowed his eyes into a thin line. From the moment the God Emperor appeared to question him, he already knew everything. He didn't point it out directly because he saw that the emotional God King had been working hard for the God race for so long. He didn't want to be so thick-skinned and wanted to talk with him after everything was over. Alas, the emotional God King was becoming more and more excessive, magnifying the emotions of more than half of the gods. If he let him continue, would the God Emperor really have to act against these gods? Since that was the case, he could only end everything from the source. God Emperor. The emotional God King's expression was pained, and his eyes were filled with panic. From the God Emperor's eyes, he could see that the God Emperor really wanted to kill him. He'd never imagined this would happen. Manipulating the emotions of the other gods was indeed his doing. After all, among the previous God Kings, he was actually the most neutral. He had no ill intentions towards Ji Yuan, nor did he want to participate in this conflict. Unfortunately, the appearance of the Wu clan and the Five Elements' great emperor had forced him to abandon his neutral stance. Although he looked impressive on the surface, his long robes were filled with frightening injuries. These injuries had all been inflicted by the shaman tribe's ancestral shaman and the Five Elements' great emperor. Not only that, but the Protoss he controlled had also suffered heavy casualties. His eldest son had even died in that war. Now that the God Emperor had announced an alliance with Ji Yuan, how could the emotional God Monarch agree? He was also afraid of the God King, so he secretly chose the most suitable speaker among the many gods, which was the Lord God. After that, he used what he thought was the most obscure method to completely mobilize the emotions of all those who had opposing opinions on this alliance. All of this was to prevent the emergence of this alliance. In the end, he had been discovered. The Emperor God did not get angry at the Lord God and the true gods. Instead, he found the source of the problem. Orbis, do you know that your current position was given to you by this emperor? Subordinate. The emotional God King, who was being strangled, was unable to speak. This emperor admires the power of your emotions and bestows upon you the position of emotional God King. If you know how to be grateful, you should obediently serve this emperor. But what are you doing now? Mobilizing the emotions of the true gods to question this emperor? Many of the true gods were shocked. Had the emotional God King used the power of his emotions to mobilize the true gods' emotions? Those true gods who had a neutral opinion towards this alliance looked at each other and understood what was going on. No wonder there were so many people clamoring. It was all because of the emotional God King. Do any of you know why Orbis interfered with this alliance? Hasn't he always maintained a neutral attitude? Why is he suddenly opposing it so fiercely now? At some point, Yale had left his position and walked to the Lord God's side. The War Goddess had set up a barrier beforehand, which was why Yale asked this question. I heard that in order to force the Freedom God King and Pleasure God King back, the shamans launched an attack on the extraterritorial god race. The East god race suffered the most. Attack the extraterritorial god race? Yale's eyes widened. He actually didn't know about this. Our North god race was also attacked, but you were in confinement at the time. No one dared to disturb you for something like this. However, our North god race didn't suffer too much damage. Only the Qing family suffered some injuries. No one died. All right, I understand. Yale waved his hand lightly. In his heart, however, he was angry at the God Emperor for confining him and the Master of the Law for sealing his deity Ocean. He was the God King of the North God race, but he didn't know that his race was under attack. Considering that his subordinates were just sharing his burden, he didn't say anything to reprimand them. Even so, this definitely won't affect Orbis's conditions. The emotional God King's eldest son, Auro, is also dead, the war goddess said. Hearing this, Yale instantly understood. He quickly left the war goddess's position and returned to his own. Your Majesty. Without god power, Yale could only use his meaty voice to shout. Your Majesty, please consider the fact that the emotional God King has worked hard for the God race for so many years and spare him this time. For the sake of the God race, don't let any more God Kings fall. Right now, the God race only has us 2 God Kings left. He definitely couldn't let the emotional God King die just like that. He hated Ji Yuan, so there was a high chance that he would be Yang Kai's ally in the future. If Yang Kai didn't take such a great helper under him or make him stand on his side, he would feel like he was at a disadvantage. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, please reconsider. As soon as Yale finished speaking, all the gods of the North God race spoke up. The mighty God race army knelt on the ground. The gods of the East God race also pleaded on behalf of their God King. Humph! With a heavy snort, the God Emperor pushed the emotional God King away. The emotional God King, who had finally broken free, coughed violently. He didn't forget to kneel as well. Thank you for your benevolence, Your Majesty. Orbis, don't forget who gave you everything you have. This matter will end here. If I find out that you dare to do this again or go against the Alliance, I will naturally be able to take back what I gave you. Glaring fiercely at the emotional God King, the gods who had lost their emotions, especially the Master God, hurriedly knelt down and buried their heads into the ground. Chapter 1873. Your Majesty, I'll see you off here. Outside the God realm, Elder Lin stood by Yi Zichen's side as he bid the God Emperor farewell. Under the God Emperor's heavy-handed policies, none of the gods dared object. They all knelt and obeyed the God Emperor's proclamation to ally with the Epic Era. The Epic Era had many matters to attend to, so Yi Zichen couldn't stay for long. That's fine. As he spoke, the God Emperor glanced at the gods behind him. I'm afraid I'll need to mediate the internal affairs of the God realm as well. Heavy-handed policies aren't the way to solve problems. I'll have to go back and calm the people down. I've troubled you, Your Majesty, said Yi Zichen. It's no problem. This is how things should be. The God Emperor laughed. You don't understand the current state of the God realm, Master of the Stars. Although we don't have internal strife and external aggression, we're more or less in the same boat. Even if you hadn't ascended, an alliance with the Epic Era would have been necessary. Yi Zichen chuckled. The God Emperor cupped his fists heartily. We'll part ways here. We'll part ways here. A black hole-like vortex appeared before them, and they walked into it, shoulder to shoulder. Yi Zichen passed through the black hole gate with relative ease. The Epic Era and the God Realm were billions of miles apart, but in a few breaths of time, they arrived outside the Epic Era. When he looked down, he saw the Third Era, the place where the gods, Yao, and demons lived. Yi Zichen gazed off into the distance and saw a tiny, azure planet. This was the home he often dreamed of. He knew the way home. Unfortunately, he couldn't go back yet. Do you see it? Elder Lin noticed Yi Zichen's gaze and chuckled. This world had long since been imprinted in his mind. He didn't even need to look to know where Yi Zichen was looking. That water-covered planet used to be his favorite place. It was there that he'd met the love of his life. He'd once wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, but she had her own destiny. All he could do was watch her grow old and leave him. I see it. What a beautiful planet. No matter how you look at it, it's brimming with life. Unlike the foreign realm's celestial race and the Third Era's celestial race, they look like withered leaves from the outside. Elder Lin sighed. Yes. Yi Zichen's eyes were filled with indescribable emotion. It was just as Elder Lin had said. Of all the planets he'd seen, the one he'd once lived on was the most beautiful. However, there were still many people who were not grateful for the blessing of this planet and wantonly destroyed the ecological environment here. If he could return one day, Yi Zichen would do everything in his power to protect this beautiful planet. Do you want to go back? Elder Lin smiled. Hearing that, Yi Zichen looked towards Elder Lin. Do you want to go back? Of course he wanted to go back. After running around for so long, who would say they didn't want to go back? However, the current me doesn't seem to be qualified to go back yet. I will go back. Elder Lin patted him on the shoulder and said, after you settle the matters here, I will judge whether or not I can let you return to that planet. Don't blame me, this old man also likes that place very much. I don't want it to be threatened at all. You're the mighty king of the laws. Can't you protect a planet? Asked Yi Zichen. Some things are not as simple as you think. Elder Lin sighed indifferently. There are actually far too many things in the Milky Way that the Divine Emperor and I cannot control. When Yi Zichen saw that Elder Lin seemed to want to say something, he glanced at him a few more times, but didn't reply. I don't like trouble. All right, you and the Divine Emperor seem to have quite a few secrets, but I'm not really interested right now. Don't tell me. Even if you do, I won't listen, Yi Zichen shrugged. You. Elder Lin smiled helplessly. What he didn't know was that even if Yi Zichen wanted to listen, he wouldn't tell him right now. There are some things that the current Yi Zichen can't know. Oh right. When we left, the Divine Emperor seemed to be acting a bit strange. At that moment, Yi Zichen suddenly recalled the last time he saw the Divine Emperor before entering the black hole. At the time, he felt that the Divine Emperor's expression was very strange, but since Elder Lin had already entered the black hole, Yi Zichen didn't ask him about it. Something's wrong with him? Yi Zichen nodded, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong. It was just a feeling. It felt like something was wrong with him. Perhaps it's because you agreed to our request and let go of the heavy burden weighing down on your heart. He can't help but want to vent his emotions, but he has to restrain himself in front of you. That's why you find it strange, right? Elder Lin laughed, but didn't take Yi Zichen's words to heart. You don't need to worry about him. Didn't you keep saying that the situation in your era is terrible? Go back and deal with it as soon as possible. Once you're done, you can contact me through Linru. Linru? That's right. Not long ago I sent her to your era. She should be in Chaos City right now, right? The Divine Emperor watched as the two of them left. When the black hole disappeared from his sight, his face, which had been maintaining a smile, instantly turned extremely pale. He endured the pain, found a flowing boulder, and sat down. Then he took out a red pill and popped it into his mouth. His divine power surged, causing the pill's effects to spread, but before long, the Divine Emperor coughed up a mouthful of blood. Some of it landed on his palm. When he looked at his palm, he saw that the blood wasn't pure gold. The blood was murky and tainted with filth. Ha! The God Emperor, who was sitting on the huge rock, smiled weakly. At this moment, he didn't even know how far he had left the God race with the huge rock. He couldn't help but smile wryly. He lay back on the boulder, looked up at the chaos, and muttered to himself. Are you in such a hurry? Don't be in such a rush. What's yours will be yours sooner or later. You've already waited for so long. How about you give me 10,000 more years? I'm not asking for much. All I want is 10,000 years. Can't you wait that long? To his surprise, as soon as he said that, the Divine Emperor's face regained some color, and the feeling of weakness in his body also disappeared. He stood up from the boulder and looked around. For some reason, a light sigh flashed in his eyes. You really are heartless. Chapter 1874. As the Divine Emperor and the others left, the Protoss also returned to their respective palaces. Yale sat in the Divine Palace. His face was so sunken that it seemed like it was about to drip water. The entire Divine Palace was filled with a heavy atmosphere, and the overgods beneath him did not even dare to breathe too loudly. None of them dared to disturb him. Alliance. He really dares to say that. The enraged Yale gritted his teeth and snorted. The other main gods looked down at the red carpet in the palace. Everyone could see that Yale was very angry about the alliance between the Protoss and Ji-Yuan. In their hearts, the alliance was not a big deal. Ji-Yuan did not affect the interests of the god race, nor did he take the initiative to provoke them. It had always been their god race who took the initiative to attack them and destroy them. No one knew why Yale was so angry about this. Your Majesty, please be careful with your words. The war goddess tried to persuade Yale despite his anger. Careful with my words? Yale grinned at the war goddess. To be honest, it was the war goddess who was trying to persuade him. If it was someone else, he might well, now that his deity ocean was sealed, he could not do anything to these main gods. Humph. Don't tell me I can't grumble? He did not even discuss the most basic thing with the Divine Emperor and the main gods. He made the decision on his own. He can force everyone to agree to this alliance, but does he want to deprive me of my right to complain? Not to mention that he is no longer a Protoss. Even if he is in this palace now, I will say it. The main gods kept quiet out of fear. It seemed like their king was really angry. In the past, Yale had never had such a big problem with the Divine Emperor. Now that he said this, it was obvious that the alliance had touched his bottom line. What was the reason? Could it be that Qing Li from the Qing family? It was said that before Yale became the God King of Destruction, he was childhood friends with the talented lady of the Qing family, Qing Li. He was also brothers with her brother, Sword of Heaven and Earth, Qing Lan. However, Qing Li got together with Gu Xuanda from the First Era. After that, Yale inexplicably hated the First Era. He even attacked the First Era, which had already transcended, as if he was venting some kind of anger. In private, he had been planning to destroy the Third Era. If we think of it that way, doesn't that mean Yale versus Qing Li? The sovereigns didn't dare to continue thinking about this. If Yale were to find out that they were spying on their lord's private matters, when the seal on his deity C was broken, they would not be able to bear the consequences. But looking at the war goddess's appearance, she did bear some resemblance to Qing Li. Your Majesty! The war goddess continued to try and persuade the enraged Yale. Suddenly, Yale looked at the goddess of war. The scarlet light in her eyes caused the surrounding main gods to break into a cold sweat for the war goddess. Yale continued to stare at the war goddess. After a long time, Yale silently restrained his anger. I understand. It's good that His Majesty has regained his rationality. The war goddess nodded lightly and returned to her seat. The other main gods looked on in bewilderment. So many exhortations were just to help Yale regain his rationality? What was going on? Just as they were still in shock, they heard Yale laugh indifferently as he looked at the entrance of the Divine Palace. You're really something. You can even manipulate my emotions. You really have what it takes to be a god king. At this moment, the other main gods felt their hearts skip a beat. Wasn't he talking about the emotional god king? The emotional god king was in the Divine Palace of Destruction? Looking at the entrance of the hall, there was nothing strange at all. But just as Yale finished speaking, the emotional god king and the other main gods under him appeared at the entrance. They didn't return to the emotional god palace. This main god under you is really amazing. Out of all the main gods in this palace, only she sensed it. Yale, you've picked up a treasure. Emotional god King Orbis laughed out loud as he walked in with a majestic gait. Humph. Yale snorted noncommittally. He signaled the attendant beside him with his eyes, and the attendant immediately left. Before long, a chair appeared beside Yale. "Sit." The emotional God King took a few steps forward and sat down. The main gods he brought all stood at the side of the divine palace. "You didn't return to the emotional God palace. What are you doing here?" Yale asked. "Weren't you the one who asked me to come?" Emotional Divine King took out a needle-like leaf from his bosom and placed it on the table between the two of them. "This is a leaf that only your northern god clan has. Before I left, I saw this leaf land on my collar, so I came uninvited. Then I have to say that you've misunderstood." Yale smiled indifferently. He did not admit it, but kept the leaf in his pocket. Seeing this, the emotional God King raised his eyebrows slightly. He shrugged and smiled, not saying anything more. "All right, it seems like I've been overthinking. But since we're here and want to sit here, the God King of Destruction shouldn't chase us away, right? Why would he? Take a seat." Following Yale's words, 8 more chairs appeared in the palace. The two main gods sat opposite each other. At this moment, Yale also spoke, as if he was having a casual conversation. "No one saw us coming, right? Now that the two of us are meeting, it's inevitable that others will gossip. Who dares?" The emotional God King snorted. "Right now, there are only 2 God Kings in the God Clan. I really can't think of anyone who dares to offend our 2 God palaces. But when I came here, I came through a subspace. The main gods under you didn't seem to notice, right? Naturally, no one else would notice as well." Just as he finished speaking, the emotional God King glanced at the war goddess. Except for this goddess, the war goddess did not smile. Even when the emotional God King smiled at her, she still kept a straight face without any expression. The emotional God King touched the tip of his nose and changed the topic. "I wonder what the God King of Destruction thinks about the God Emperor's alliance. What else can he do?" Yale said helplessly. "The God Emperor has already announced to the world that Ji Yuan is the God Clan's ally. As a subordinate, I can only follow. The God King of Destruction is pretending to be confused. I'm really confused." Yale's face was filled with confusion. "The emotional God King suddenly came to my place and said such strange things. I really don't understand what you're trying to say." The main gods from both sides also looked at each other. The 2 God Kings each had their own ulterior motives. Actually, there were some things that both sides were well aware of. It was just a matter of who was willing to expose everything first. Alas, the emotional God King might be more urgent. "Since the God King of Destruction doesn't understand, then I'll explain it to you more clearly." Chapter 1875. Alliance. When Xiao Yumei and the others heard Yi Zichen's words, their hearts filled with astonishment. Yi Zichen had been gone for several days. It was hard not to worry. No matter what, he'd gone to the outside god race, which happened to be in the middle of a war with Ji Yuan. The God King's deaths were likely caused by their internal strife. The gods of the outside realm would also push the blame onto the Era. Yi Zichen was the lord of the Emperor's Star, the Era's supreme ruler. Naturally, their hatred for Yi Zichen came from within. However, when Yi Zichen returned to Chaos City, he told them he'd formed an alliance with the outside god race. Everyone who heard this was shocked speechless. After a while, Xiao Yumei laughed, looked around, then turned to Yi Zichen. "This might seem like a good thing. Perhaps." Yi Zichen wasn't confident. In truth, he didn't have much faith in this alliance. The Outerium god race currently only had 2 God Kings. Looking at the situation back then, the emotional God King had already expressed his opinion on the alliance very directly. He'd rejected it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used the Grand Tao of Emotions to stir up the gods' emotions. Although Yale hadn't explicitly rejected it, Yi Zichen was certain that he had opposing views on the alliance as well. If both God Kings felt the same way, what was the point of this alliance? Even the God Emperor, with his current cultivation and might, could suppress the gods, overgods, and God Kings into submission. I believe everyone understands the principle of bouncing back after hitting the bottom. The current outside God race was like a spring. If you suppressed it to the point where it couldn't be suppressed any longer, it would spring back up. When that happened, Yi Zichen really didn't know what the God Emperor would do to maintain the alliance. Kill those rebels from the extraterritorial gods? At least, Yi Zichen couldn't think of a suitable solution. Su Meier frowned. She'd been in a terrible mood ever since she heard this news. Especially after Xiao Yumei's comforting words, her brows furrowed even more. She'd been holding it in for so long, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She blurted out the words in her heart. That's a good thing? I don't think it's a good thing. Yi Zichen couldn't help but glance at her. When Yi Zichen noticed her expression, he couldn't help but arch his brows. In fact, he had always been suspicious about Su Meier's identity. She'd appeared out of the blue. At first, Yi Zichen thought she was the Five Elements Great Emperor's daughter, but then he found out that the Five Elements Great Emperor's lovers were the Fox Empress and clan head, and that they had no children. Su Meier's identity was like a cloud of doubt lingering in his heart. Then, when the God race attacked, they rushed to Chaos City. Her words were filled with her understanding of the Outer Realm's celestial race, especially the old man beside her, who seemed to have a direct conflict with God Monarch Joy. One must know that even the great emperors of the previous era only had a smattering of knowledge about the outer world. How did they know so much? And now, Su Meier was questioning him furiously. How many things had this girl been hiding from them? Meier. Xiao Yumei smiled gently. Perhaps you have your own thoughts on this matter. However, for the entire era, this alliance is truly a blessing. Xiao Yumei's voice was soft and gentle. When he heard her, he felt as if his heart had calmed down somewhat. She smiled warmly, looked at Su Meier, and pulled her into her arms. Think about it this way. Even though the Outerium God race has lost 2 God Kings, they are still a plane that has existed for countless years. The strength of their race is not something we can imagine. The era's internal problems have yet to be resolved, and they've suffered countless casualties. In terms of overall strength, they're far weaker than them. If we don't ally with them, will they continue to attack us? If they attack, how will Ji Yuan defend against them? In other words, even if we don't ally with them, we can't do anything to them. Zichen should be the strongest in the current era, but just ask him. Is he confident enough to take on the God Emperor? When he heard that, Yi Zichen instinctively shook his head. The God Emperor's cultivation was simply too high. Standing before him, Yi Zichen felt as if he were standing in a cloud of mist. He couldn't see through the God Emperor's strength at all. His every movement seemed to fuse with heaven and earth. This was a realm where countless great Daos fused into one body. At the very least, Yi Zichen couldn't do it right now. Right now, he might be the equivalent of the Outer Realm God Kings, and that was only a relatively rash estimate. If the God Kings used some unknown trump card, the odds of victory would be uncertain. Su Meier fell silent. How could she not know this? However, an alliance wasn't as simple as a truce. She and the Outer Realm God race had irreconcilable differences. At the very least, until the person she hated died, she couldn't accept an alliance. Give the era some time. At that moment, Xiao Yumei smiled warmly and took Su Meier's hands in her own. The warmth of her palms flowed through Su Meier's icy hands and into her entire body. She couldn't help but feel a warm current slowly flow through her chest. The era's overall strength is still too weak. Give it some time and we'll grow a little stronger. There were conflicts between the outer domain's celestial race and the epic era. With such conflicts existing, the alliance between the two sides wouldn't last long. Perhaps the God Emperor and Zichen both want to ally. Both planes can live in harmony. But even if we don't, the Outer Realm God race will destroy this alliance. I'm sure Zichen knows this as well, which is why he agreed. In truth, he's only trying to buy time for the Era God race. He had to admit, Xiao Yumei really was a smart woman. Unlike Yi Zichen, she hadn't personally witnessed the Outer Realm God Race's situation. Most of her understanding of the Outer Realm God Race came from Yi Zichen or someone else. The only time she had a deep understanding of the outside was when he'd been imprisoned in the North God Race. Even with these bits and pieces of information, she was still able to see the problem clearly. Not only that, but when she was wise and farsighted, she knew how to conceal her own brilliance. If she had to say something, she would say it. If she didn't, she wouldn't say a single word. She was more than willing to stand silently behind Yi Zichen and help him solve his problems. It was said that, behind every successful man, there was a woman who silently supported him. It was rumored that Zhuge Liang, famed for his intellect, was no less clever than his wife, Huang Yueying. She'd told him all of his brilliant plans.